DPH, great to have
What's
you back
up,
on the
brother?
channel, man. How are you?
Good. How you been, man? Last time we chatted was in Nashville.
I know. That was a good time. Good old Nashville with DebateCon. It was awesome. But yeah, no, I'm good, man. Just back in Australia now. Been back here for a little while. Watching your streams lately. Been interesting.
I appreciate that.
How are you guys? You had fun in Nashville with the team?
Yeah, we had fun in Nashville, and then I ended up going to a conference down in Florida right after that.
Oh, that's
That
right.
was with Jay Dyer and Father Peter Heers, Father Deacon Dr. Ananias, and stuff like that. That went really well. And then, what was it, 3 weeks ago? Went down to Andrews and was able to participate and film in the new debate course on feminism. So
Yeah,
that
my
was,
team edited all of that.
oh,
And
okay.
I was speaking to my editors yesterday, and I was like, "How'd you go with all the editing?" And they were like, "Yeah, I can't listen to DPH talk about philosophy anymore." Because your bits were
Oh,
super
man.
long, and you were just like epistemology, and
Shots fired. Damn.
No, my editors aren't debates guys, bro. They're like, I can't listen to this. Like, I don't understand what he's saying, and I'm like, that's all right. It's you're not the target demographic. But yeah,
Well,
man. How's that been
I
going? The
appreciate
debate
the
course been going
feedback
good?
either way. So, yeah, so
The-
that was a good time. And then just been getting back into the guys in the Logos Academy. So I run a men's academy where we basically do philosophy, theology, history, read different books together, talk about, do think tanks and stuff like that. And then we do accountability regarding fitness and diet, spiritual life, and then career goals. All of us are laymen, so you got to make money. So just encouraging young guys about kind of thinking long term and how to shape your life and build something. So especially with the uncertainty right now, I mean, we're going to be getting into World War III and the Iran war, which is really precipitous of what's going to be a global war. And I'm already seeing oil prices, gasoline's already gone up $1 here in the US. And so
Yeah, no
I'm already
shit.
feeling the Strait of Hormuz being shut down.
Yeah, well, it's becoming a real commodity now. Oil, so in Australia as well, it's going to be the exact same thing. But no, it's a good point, and it's important to sort of realize that sort of stuff these days. I mean, uh, the fact that there's young guys that are just sort of floating around, they've got no community, they've got really nowhere to turn, nowhere to go. They don't have men that they're speaking to on a regular basis about what they're doing with their life and their business and their family and their fitness and everything. Like that has been so helpful to me to have men around me who I know and who are close to me who are all on the same sort of path as me. And without that, I think that I would have sort of just molded into the surroundings of whatever I did have around me, if that makes sense.
No, it makes total sense. And just to have conversations, because the average people, I mean, this is true for me. Obviously we both make a living online, but in day-to-day life, people that you're around the most, you may not be talking about, Orthodox prophecies or the latest cultural happening. And so finding like-minded people, a community where you can actually have like in-depth conversations that you may not be able to have with other people. I think that's really important. And really with all the debate stuff, that's what's going on is people are allowed to begin to think these topics out. And I think that's part of why Andrew's been so successful. It's obviously it's entertaining, but it also is helpful for people to hear arguments and then see a thought process unfold before them to be, oh, okay, well, that makes sense. And then having conversations with like-minded men, I think that's huge. And a lot of guys, everybody's so isolated. Finding a community, and that's where the church comes in, but finding a legitimate community of friends, and especially for other guys, it's underestimated the importance of that. I think we talked about that last time we were on because you were talking about martial arts and how we as men, relate to each other. So many of the young guys are just so isolated. They don't belong to a gym. They don't belong to a community. They're just kind of on their computers, and most of the community is online.
Yeah, because it's kind of the sort of thing that you have to build. I mean, it's never easy going to a new gym or going to a new martial arts place. And I tend to be quite introverted when I go into those situations. But then eventually, you keep going, you get to know a few people here and there, and then you can eventually make some friends around the gym and everything. Martial arts gyms are particularly good for that because it's more of an intimate sort of setting.
Right.
Intimate's probably the wrong word for it, but you know what I mean. But yeah, like gyms themselves, like weightlifting gyms, not the greatest in the world for that. But martial arts gyms, if you spar with a man, all of a sudden you're mates, even though you hate each other for a brief moment, you're friends after that.
Yeah, especially if he gets a good one on you.
Yeah, exactly. But then you always respect each other after. If he gets a good one on you, then you respect.
That's happened
more,
a couple times in my life where people you actually get in fights with, like in high school and college, like physical altercations. You end up becoming friends afterwards.
Yeah, two of my best mates. I like that. Yeah. All right, so we'll get into this talk about what's going on. But guys, as we go, you can actually donate to myself or DPH, and I can see both of them, and I'm just going to pull them up on screen. So Craftsman Ethos sent 10 and said she before it even started. Thank you, Craftsman. And then Hebrazi said has been a DPH member for 15 months. Says long time no see, brother. I'm back. And Red Fox with 20 says 2 great guys on stream. Great seeing the collab. We love to see it as well. And Dano with 10 as well. So welcome to DPH audience, the Church of the Eternal Logos audience. I've been watching those streams over the last few days, tuning in and out. Obviously, takes a long time to watch a lot of these streams these days. But that's why I wanted to sit you down for a while.
Especially when you create content. It's actually, it's time consuming enough to prepare for content and then record content and then, monitor the content that you just uploaded to then consume other people's content. It's hard to stay up on everybody. It's
so hard, dude. It's really difficult. Like, it's even hard to be able to read or anything these days. I've been trying to, there's just, in the morning, I'll be doing my streams and then I'll be writing my scripts for my long forms. And then in the evenings, I'll be making sure I've got everything bookmarked for the next day. And then, now I've been doing puzzles at nighttime recently, which has been nice. I'm doing a Venice puzzle at the moment. But anyways, let's talk about the war, shall we?
Let's talk about it.
Yeah.
Now, I'm actually want to pose a question to you. What's the sentiment in Australia? Because I'm curious what the Zionism, right? So here in America, we'll get into the details of the war and everything, but Trump's approval, this came out 2 days ago, and even CNN confirmed it. Amongst his base, he has a 98% approval rate. And so obviously we have a huge swath of America that's Christian Zionist. And they're viewing this war optimistically through an eschatological lens of the end times. But all my friends that I know in Europe, the tone is totally different. And it's totally against the war. It's against Israel. It's against Zionism. And they don't have all these Christian Zionists. What's it like in Australia?
Whereabouts are your friends in Europe, by the way?
Huh?
Whereabouts are your friends in Europe? Like, which countries in Europe?
Germany, England. Have a friend in Ireland.
Right. Okay, cool. Because I was thinking that you were going to be thinking like the Orthodox countries, and I was like, yeah, I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the Orthodox
that's baked into the pie there, but Western nations.
Yeah, shit. Well, I mean, that it doesn't come as any surprise to me. I think that the numbers are totally embellished of those who support the sort of Christian Zionist agenda or just the Israeli agenda in general. But in Australia, we have a problem with the deep-seated apathy over here in our culture where nobody really cares about anything that's happening in the world because things have always been so good with us. We didn't even get hit hard by the GFC. We haven't had a big war. I mean, the port of Darwin got bombed in World War II, but like no one really cares about that. We don't really think about it. World War I, we had the Battle of Gallipoli, where the Anzac soldiers, and we still remember that. We still talk about that. We had the Vietnam War, but it was a controversial, divisive war. Nobody really thinks about it too much. Then the Afghanistan-Iraq wars, no one thinks about that too much. The 2008 GFC didn't hit us very hard. We've always been rich in natural resources. The only thing that's really gotten people political over the last few years was COVID. And then also the immigration crisis, the flood of immigrants into Australia that's been going on over the past few years. Now people are looking around and thinking, holy shit, my neighborhood looks like New Delhi, which it literally does, dude.
That's what it looks like here too.
Yeah. Like I was on the beach the other day with a girl and then I was out surfing or like body surfing, not with a
Mhm.
surfboard, but body surfing because that's what I do. But
Mhm.
people laugh at me for that. But it's a good sport, body surfing's a good sport. And then I look out and I see some fucking Indian dude in jeans and runners on the beach, like going and creeping on this chick. And I'm like,
Oh, I
dude,
thought you were getting ready to say he was defecating.
no, I wouldn't be surprised. But like, yeah,
Whoa.
they're just so. Anyways, that's getting people political.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's bad. But in terms of this one, we're going to need to see the oil prices go up before Australians really start to make noise. But the Australian conservative movement is kind of similar to the American and British conservative movement in
Mhm.
the sense that it's super astroturfed by
Mhm.
like these Israeli organizations who will come in and basically just take over. I got asked to speak at an event a few months ago to do and they were like, "Oh, Tommy Robinson's going to be speaking via Zoom and stuff." And I was like, "I like Tommy Robinson. I think he's got his purpose, in terms of calling out the gangs and everything over there. But we all know that you know, he's
He's
got
bought
certain
and paid for.
allies.
Yeah.
Yeah, he's got certain allies that I wouldn't have. But anyways, I think he's got a purpose in terms of calling out the gangs. So then I contacted one of my friends in Australia who's very savvy with politics, and I said, this organization's asked me to speak at this event. What do you think? And he said, yeah, no, I wouldn't do it. These guys are they're run by a group that was, I don't know exactly what the group was called, but I'm going to say it's something along the lines of Never Again Is Now or something like that. So they've come in and basically astroturfed the whole resistance movement in Australia, and it's like
Mm.
it's super black pilling. But then you've got a lot of people in Australia who will do like the false binary thing, where they'll see
Mhm.
we got a big Muslim problem in Australia. Israeli flag, drape myself in an Israeli flag, and they do that thing. So we're behind is what I mean to say.
Yeah. Well, I know that you had that one, the Jewish news correspondent, was it Rebel News down in
Yeah,
Australia?
Avi Yemeni.
Avi Amini, that's it.
Yeah,
Yep,
yeah.
yep, yep.
He's worked for the ID. He was actually an IDF soldier, and
Makes
then
sense.
all of a sudden, what do you know? He's over in Australia and he's leading the charge in the conservative movement. Israeli guy, IDF soldier. It's probably all a coincidence, though.
Right. Did you I don't know if you saw, it was kind of going around X today that I think it was like 25 to 27% of the IDF was American Jews, and only 15% of Jews have participated in the US military, which pretty insightful.
Yeah,
That a large swath, which is no surprise, a large swath of the Jewish community, probably in New York, mostly New York and Florida, go and serve in the IDF, but don't even touch the U.S. military. Which, at this point, are they really anything different?
yeah. I don't really know how it goes in Australia. Like, I don't really know too much about how the Jewish community rolls in Australia. But what I do know is that when I used to live in Melbourne, I used to go to a school in the eastern suburbs, and I used to go through an area called Caulfield a lot. In Caulfield, there's a lot of Jewish people, and they used to have their similar to like the Tyler Oliveira documentary the other day.
Mhm.
We used to just think that they were these sort of strange people who had their own ambulances and their own everything, and their own little communities. They would never really leave the communities, and they were just this really insulated community. So that's all I ever really knew about them in Australia. But then when you start to look into the political workings in Australia and the different organizations that are funding the different right wing
Mhm.
campaigns and everything, it starts to become abundantly clear that we have quite a similar problem on our hands.
Yeah, yeah, it seems to be the case, generally speaking, with the entire West, and that's why I was curious about the Australian situation, because we're already seeing Western nations at least begin to defend Cyprus. So the UK and
Yep.
France have joined. Spain is preventing the US from using the military bases in Spain to implement the war against Iran. And then Iran, I guess, last night sent out a message that warned any European nation that if they were to join this war, that they would be attacked. And they've already attacked one NATO country, which is Turkey. And I'm sure we're going to get into the Orthodox perspective on the end times, eschatology, the rise of Antichrist, all that stuff, and how we believe. And this, I said this, I think, last time I was on the channel when we talked about some of this stuff, that if we were ever to actually go into war with Iran, which now we're in it, this would be precipitous of a global conflict that would lead into the undermining of Erdogan in Turkey.
Yeah, I was actually just saying this to you before. One of the reasons why I've been keeping an eye on your streams recently, and one of the reasons why I wanted to get you on more, because last time you were on, and people can go and trace this back, you were saying that you were talking about, I think it was it Father or was it Saint Paisios?
Yep.
Yeah, talking about Iran being like a domino here, and then eventually as well about Erdogan.
Yep. And I don't know if people had seen, I covered it over on my channel, Church of the Eternal Logos, but the former prime minister of Israel, one of the generals of Israel, all said that the next target is Erdogan. And there was a piece, I think it was Time put it out, that said that Erdogan's the next threat. And this was like 2 weeks before the Iran war started. So one of my speculations is that once Netanyahu saw that Trump gave him the green light and started to move troops and logistics towards the Middle East, like 2 weeks before this conflict, all of a sudden you start hearing all these high-profile Israelis talk about Turkey. And I think from a secular perspective, okay, well, Turkey's the next major military in the region. In fact, many speculate that Turkey's military is much stronger than Iran.
Yeah,
but
I would say so.
Yeah, and that's the general consensus, is that Turkey has the strongest military in the region. So it makes sense, okay, Israel, but it only from a theological perspective, I think, is it useful to look at this war. And you have to understand the end-time theology of the Jews, and that this is not some random event. Obviously, many people following me has heard Netanyahu for the last 30 years talk about how Iran is weeks to months away from a nuclear weapon. And this is all part of a larger theological perspective of the Jews, that Iran represents Amalek. And it's no coincidence that this war then begins on Purim. Purim is kind of, for secular Jews, it's kind of like Halloween. They dress up, they wear masks, but it is celebrating the massacre of 75,000 Persians. Well, right. Persia is Iran. So it's very symbolic that the first day of this war began on Purim, which then culminated on March 3rd. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
I didn't know that the first day of the war was on that day.
Yep. And there was a blood moon. So astrology is really important to Jews, generally speaking, but Israelis. And there was a blood moon on the 3rd of March at 3:33 a.m., which is obviously auspicious. If you're Kabbalistic, numerology is very, very important. And so no surprise there that they are in war against Amalek, i.e. the Iranians. And it culminates on March 3rd. So the third day of the third month at 3:33 a.m., there is a blood moon, which is very auspicious for the Jews. So you can see how this project is tied with the Greater Israel, which Greater Israel is the expansion of modern day Israel, which is really relegated to the Levant. But what their plan is, and the IDF soldiers have the Greater Israel Project literally on their arm.
Yeah.
It demonstrates that the goal is to reestablish the Old Testament kingdom, which expanded all the way to the Euphrates in Iraq and all the way to the Nile in Egypt. And so that includes Lebanon, Jordan, parts of Syria, parts of Iraq, parts of Saudi Arabia, all of which they believe, and it's part of their eschatology of bringing forth their Mashiach, their Messiah, that they need to conquer these lands. And so multiple things are happening right now. The expansion of Israel is going on. That's why half the bombings have been in Beirut. They say it's because of Hezbollah and all this different stuff, but they want to expand Israel north, which makes sense. But what I would recommend everyone do is just keep an eye out for the Al-Aqsa Mosque. This is the Dome of the Rock, the mosque in Jerusalem. It was just closed today. Now, if you saw that Tucker Carlson put out a very controversial video 2 days ago talking about, one of the main thesis of that video is that Carlson is arguing that Jews, Israel, are going to use this to blow up the mosque. Now, why would the Jews want to blow up the Muslim mosque in Jerusalem? Because they have to build the third temple. You see, part of the to understand the psychology of Israel, you have to understand that the religion of the Old Testament no longer exists. And that is a sacrificial temple religion. The temple is gone. It got destroyed in 70 AD by the Romans. The Jews went in diaspora, and the sacrifices no longer exist. This is what then was created in the absence of the temple, is what we would call rabbinic Judaism. And this is where then the Talmud, a rabbinic commentary on the Torah, becomes an essential text for Jews, and they then do their worship in synagogues. But the whole
So just quickly,
go ahead.
so I can understand this. So the temple Judaism of the Old Testament no longer exists because that specific temple doesn't exist, and then now they have synagogues which are meant to emulate the temple, but it's not the real temple?
Correct. The real temple has to be in Jerusalem.
Okay, so they're only allowed to necessarily worship there. That's what the texts say.
Well, they can worship in their synagogues all around the world, but to reignite and reestablish the Old Testament religion, they must do the animal sacrifices again. Now, as a Christian, Christ is the last sacrifice. He was a self-sacrificial, so he put himself in that position to fulfill the tradition of sacrifice of the Old Testament. This is why, for Christians, we believe the church, and I'm Orthodox, so the Orthodox Church specifically is the continuation of Israel. There's two covenants in Scripture. The first one is Moses, Mount Sinai, the Ten Commandments, the Mosaic covenant, and that culminates in and then is fulfilled in Christ. And then there's a second covenant, the covenant of Christ, and that is where Christians, if you read the epistles of Paul, this is the whole understanding of Israel, is that Christianity is truly the continuation. And you can make the argument that Christianity is actually older than Rabbinic Judaism because it gets developed 100 to 200 years later during the diaspora. And you start to get, the Babylonian Talmud, the Jerusalem Talmud, these different Talmudic texts. And so for Jews to bring their Messiah, which is essential for them, right? Within their worldview, they are the chosen people. And they believe that they will rule a global kingdom from Jerusalem. Now, from an Orthodox perspective, that's exactly what we believe about the Antichrist. And so the historical animosity between Christians, be it Catholics or Orthodox, with the Jewish community is that it's eschatologically, regarding how we view the end times and the trajectory of history, they're actually diametrically opposed to each other. So you hear this Judeo-Christianity.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah, there's a shared Old Testament faith between the two traditions, but the way that they view the end of history, their Mashiach is our Antichrist. We believe the Messiah has already come.
Yeah, I was watching Tucker's video about it yesterday, and I understand all of this about how obviously the Jewish religion is like the religion of the Old Testament. They obviously don't believe that Jesus was the Messiah. They believe that their Messiah is still coming. Therefore, there's that conflict. When we believe that will be a false Messiah or an Antichrist, they believe that will be their Messiah. But what do they think? They think that will bring about the end of history, and they think that's a good thing. They don't that their Messiah comes, or do they not? Do they think it won't be the end of history, or?
Well, they believe that they're going to essentially rule a spiritual kingdom. In a sense, it's not eternal. It's not like the way that Christians would understand the New Jerusalem, where Christ comes and history is ended. It's more along the lines that history culminates in the veneration of the Jewish community and the recognition of them as the chosen people of God. And that's where you can find these videos on X of these rabbis talking about the Noahide laws. And the Noahide laws are it's a more rudimentary, simplified law and behavioral regulations for non-Jews. So Noah was not Jewish, right? Adam and Eve were not Jewish. Judaism emerges after Abraham. That's the whole point of the Davidic line. So the idea and it moves from Abraham to the concept of an Israelite, later to the concept of a Jew as we recognize today, that really begins due to the Persians labeling these groups of people because they were multiple different tribes. But the dominant tribe that controlled the temple during the Old Testament period was the tribe of Judah. And so when they went into diaspora after the first temple was destroyed, the Persians referred to them as Judahs or Jews. And so that's where we get this term that then it's a term that then unites all the tribes together under a single banner. So it doesn't matter if they're from one tribe or the other. We just call them all Jews now. And that really got going. It's the Persians that really linguistically constructed that category. So
yeah, there's an old feud, obviously, between the Jews and the Persians.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Very, very, yeah. Long history. Just read your Bible. I mean, Cyrus the Great, who then allowed them to build the second temple, was the king of Persia. Yeah. And so there is long tensions between these two powers. And that's why for the Jews, they view this in theological terms. That's why you hear Netanyahu refer to Iran as Amalek all the time. You hear it referred to as a holy war, which you add all this stuff. So to concisely wrap up what I'm trying to say about the war from the Jewish perspective is from their eschatological timeline, there was a few things that had to come in place. The first one is the Jewish return to the land. We see that with Theodor Herzl towards the end of the 19th century, and this promise that the Jews will eventually have their own land. Early 20th century, you get the Balfour Declaration, where that land gets essentially sold to the Rothschilds. And then you get the erection of Israel, 1948. Once you get the establishment of it, all of this is prophetic from the Jewish perspective. Then you had to have Jewish sovereignty over Jerusalem. And so we see that for them, building the third temple is, for what they would argue, is the actual fulfillment of controlling Jerusalem. So they've reclaimed Jerusalem in 1967, but to own Jerusalem, they have to rebuild the temple on the Mount. And that's where this then is the full sovereignty of the Temple Mount. This is for them essential and a prerequisite for the Messiah to come. And this would be perfect pretext. We're in the war with Iran. And I showed last night videos of rabbis in Israel saying, well, they should have done this during the 12-day war. They should have just shot a missile up in the air, let it come down and blow up the mosque and say that it was Iran. And I would, just like Tucker Carlson was mentioning, I would say it's very likely that that could happen. And that would then give them the pretext to begin construction of the third temple, which, and I showed in last night in my video, there's a new military patch that the IDF are wearing. I mentioned the Greater Israel. Well, now they have a new patch, and the new patch is the third temple. And there's all these soldiers, they took selfies like showing off their new patch. Well, why would the IDF be given a patches that represent Greater Israel Project and the third temple? Because as one of the IDF soldiers said, and Tucker played it in his video, that's what they're fighting for. They're fighting for the expansion of Israel, and they're fighting to rebuild the third temple, to reestablish the sacrificial system of the Old Testament, which they believe will bring down the Messiah and allow them to then rule the world from Jerusalem.
Yeah, the thing is, it's so duplicitous, the way that it's communicated to the Goyim compared to the way that they sort of talk about it amongst themselves. But yeah, I mean, one of the things I don't really get, though, is that Israel is a largely secular country. I mean, if you look back at even Ben-Gurion, secularist, Menachem Begin, secularist, even Jabotinsky, secularist, Netanyahu is not a religious observant. Nope. So what is with the eschaton and the eschatological view if these guys are all sort of secularists?
Well, it's a good question. I don't think there's an official response to that, but I agree. Like, was it Malachowski is like the Lithuanian Polish last name of Netanyahu? Yeah. And that kind of gets into speculation about the 13 tribe theory of Arthur Kessler, the Khazarian theory. But it is strange, right? There's never been a prime minister of Israel who's not Ashkenazi. Yeah. And many Ashkenazis are what we would refer to as Reformed Jews, meaning they're secular Jews. They don't really practice religiously the Jewish faith. However, they identify as Jewish ethnically, and because of that, believe that they have a duty to defend and promote Judaism. Now, Netanyahu, like you said, is very secular, but he seems to be like a secular apocalyptic or
And you do see him talking to these Orthodox rabbis sometimes where they're saying, have you ever seen that video of him talking to the rabbis? And the rabbis are saying, you need to make it quicker. You need to bring about the third temple quicker. And he's like, we're trying.
Yes, exactly. And so there is no, and this was even brought up with Tucker Carlson and Mike Huckabee in the interview they did a week ago, is that what connection does Netanyahu have? Because this idea of the Jews have a right to the land, they're the chosen people, it's the religion they practice. Well, that religion doesn't exist. And Netanyahu, they grew up speaking English and Yiddish. They didn't speak Hebrew. Obviously, he does speak Hebrew, but he doesn't practice Judaism. He's basically a secular Reformed Jew. And you see that it's like tied with a supremacist ideology. And Judaism is explicitly a supremacist ideology. I would argue that Islam has a supremacist streak, and that's what they believe about the infidels. And Christianity is very different in how it deals with non-Christians. It's not, now, obviously the Crusades and there's been battles, but that has to do with an aggressive force as an opposition. Christianity didn't just go and massacre people or give them the option between the jizya or conversion. That's a uniquely Islamic feature. So all these secular Jews running Israel, it makes you wonder what is the connection between secular Reformed Jews and the Likud party, which is absolutely theologically driven. It's like whether they practice the rituals or not, they all believe in this supremacy ideology, and they believe that the destiny of their country is the expansion of it and this rebuilding of the third temple. I'd be curious, like, what does Netanyahu really believe? Does he really believe if they rebuild the third temple and they begin the animal sacrifices, which would begin with the red heifers, the purity rituals, does he think like the Mashiach is going to descend from heaven, or what? I'd be curious what he.
I wonder if you could explain it away by it being some sort of a tribal allegiance. Like, for example, the Jew. Like when you look at the formation of Israel, you have got obviously the Rothschilds funding it from as far back as the 19th century, and then you've got like Ben Gurion and the socialists who are the initial party, and then you've got the more right-wing parties like the militants, Jabotinsky, and these sorts of guys, and they're all coming together with this sort of fire in their belly. Like, we've been, exiled from all these different countries, and now we're going to be Jewish nationalists. We're not going to take any bullshit. We're going to do what we've got to do. So I wonder if it's that sort of a spirit that you sort of still see in the IDF today, where it's not necessarily a religious conviction, but it's more of like a cultural supremacist conviction and like a historical grievance that they've got.
Yeah.
And then the third temple and everything is more of a symbolic fuck you.
Right. No, I could see that. I mean, from an Orthodox Christian perspective, now I'm going to get spiritual on everyone. I mean, I view it as the spirit of Antichrist, which is a spirit that transcends history. That's why we as Orthodox Christians believe in Antichrist typologies. Nero, Diocletian, Napoleon. These types of figures represent and are indicative of the aims of Antichrist. The unique feature is that we now live in a globalized world. No typology that existed previously lived in a technocratic, globalized world. Well, we live in that now, which makes the possibility of Antichrist more realizable, more probable. So from our perspective, it doesn't really matter if it's the Freemasons who believe in the Grand Architect and have incorporated the rituals of Western esotericism into their Freemasonic lodges. It doesn't matter if they're Sabbatean Frankists or Kabbalists or progressive New Agers. So it's not just the Jews, right? This is where I think people, some of the Spurgs online, it's a myopic perspective. Things are more nuanced than this. Now, I would say the faith of Judaism is most indicative because it's so diametrically opposed to Christianity at the most fundamental level, meaning who is the Messiah, who is God, all this different stuff. So Christians and Jews do not worship the same God because they don't recognize the Son, the second person, the Logos, as God incarnate. So from the Orthodox perspective, we do not worship the same God as the Jews. We do not worship the same God as the Muslims. This is different from the Catholic perspective of Vatican II. And so this Antichrist spirit has been moving forward and building this infrastructure. Now, ultimately, I think the Jewish faith, because it's their faith that's going to bring about the Antichrist, because they're Mashiach, but Peter Thiel's not Jewish. Elon
Mm.
Musk is not Jewish. And though they may say things we agree with at certain points, the infrastructure that they're ultimately building is for this global, centralized, controlled world. For Elon, he thinks this is a prerequisite to get to Mars. We have to become a type 1 civilization. And so to do that, then we need to do away with probably nation states, Agenda 21, where the whole world becomes regions. And like the North America region is the US and Canada's region number 3, along with Greenland. And this is where you can start looking at what Trump's been doing. He wanted to buy Greenland. He ended up getting a deal, threatened Canada, probably, just rhetoric. But even that idea of uniting Greenland and Canada to the United States is exactly what the UN put forth like 20, 30 years ago for the 21st century, is to do away with nations. And so why is it that the UN says something, but then, BLM progressive protesters says no border, no wall, no USA at all? Well, it's the same thing. It's the same spirit. And so I think the self-destruction of the United States, to get more specific to the Iran war, this is going to be absolutely detrimental to the United States. I would argue that this is going to lead to the undermining of them as the global hegemon. It's going to ultimately lead to the collapse of the dollar. And it's going to weaken us militarily, because people are going to see, as we're already seeing right now, that Iran can use $20,000 to $50,000 Shahed drones and cost the United States $4 million for every $1 million interceptor that we send out. And we shoot about 3 to 4 every time that there's a threat to make sure we get it. Well, we're spending so much more money than they are, and we're investing so much more than they are. And that's the whole thing about 21st century warfare. This has all been seen between Ukraine and Russia, but it's weird. It's like Hegseth and the United States still think that they're in the Cold War. I mean, the entire strategy seems to be 1980s, 1990s. And what we now see based on Ukraine and Russia is that it's more like a technologized World War I, where there's trench warfare. Everything's drones and strategic targeting. It's very different. You're not rolling up with tanks like, you used to maybe in the 90s, because they'll just get targeted by drones. So it's a totally different battlefield. And it seems like the US is just out of date. And it's amazing that what it appears based on reports that they didn't war game the fact that Iran would begin taking out these Gulf nations. I mean, that's incomprehensible that the Trump administration was surprised that Iran would begin bombing all the U.S. military bases and residential buildings in Dubai, Kuwait, Bahrain. And the whole point is that they are, all those Gulf nations exist because of the Sykes-Picot Agreement after World War I. That's where the Arabian Peninsula basically gets divided up. And those nations are so delicate. So for the last 20 years, we've been told that the future of the world is in the Middle East, Dubai being one of the examples of that. Well, what we're now realizing is that if they don't have U.S. military protection, which they don't right now, I mean, they do, but the missiles are dwindling, both stocks, U.S. and Arab. So they're getting ready to lose total protection of their countries, and they're totally dependent upon oil. So without the money from the refineries, which have also been bombed, these nations can't make money. And then they live in the desert. So the desalination facilities and the plants that these nations are entirely dependent upon, if Iran were to bomb the desalination plants, these countries don't exist. That's how delicate their existence is. And this is like now being realized. And that's why Saudi Arabia just now established negotiations today with Iran, because they realize, holy shit, what if they take out our water plant and they take out our oil refinery? We're screwed. We're screwed.
Yeah, dude, I've been noticing a lot of this going on. It's actually really funny. I know people who live in Dubai, and obviously don't wish anything bad upon them, but it is quite funny to see some of the naivety coming out of those different places, because the whole thing with Dubai is that the selling point there has been, well, it's the safest country in the world. There's little kids playing everywhere, and there's international people. It's a bit more liberal. You don't have to wear your burqa. You can go in a bikini. And, I can wear my Rolex out in the middle of the street and nobody's going to touch it. I can leave it on a park bench. And it's like, okay, cool. That's fine. But you're still on the Arabian Peninsula,
Yeah.
You're still on the Ninj, You're still going to be really sort of in a vulnerable place. And they don't really realize, a lot of these people are doing videos like, the media is trying to sell you on fear. This is all about fear, but look how safe it is here in Dubai. But what you're saying there is the actual bigger picture, in the sense that these countries are extremely vulnerable, and they're
Yes.
essentially like vassal states of the West as well.
Yes.
All of these countries are. So if they don't have that reassurance, and if Iran gain any sort of a stronghold in that area, they decide to just simply, like you said, take out the desalination plants, then these countries are screwed. And they're probably already screwed in the sense that their whole entire economy is basically based upon oil, yes, but also Westerners coming and bringing all of their money over there and then injecting their tax-free money into the economies of Bahrain and Dubai and these sorts of places. So if you disrupt that, and if it now appears unsafe, and if the whole sort of mask or facade of this like most safe place in the world is ruined, that's really bad for business for those places.
Absolutely. And the difficult part for the Arabian Peninsula is that there's two parties that have a vested interest in them not being there, or at least not being as powerful as they currently are and wealthy. And that is both Iran and Israel. Israel, and that's where Tucker Carlson, I think it was day 3 of the war, made a video that he was contacted by authorities in Saudi Arabia and Kuwait that Mossad agents had been arrested who had bombs and had planted bombs in their nations. Now, why the heck would Israel, who's an ally with the United States, who is the protectorate of these nations, begin bombing those nations, or at least having Mossad agents undercover doing such things, creating false flag situations? Could it be because the Greater Israel Project demands that the Arabian Peninsula is undermined? How can, like, I played a video last night of a rabbi talking about how they will control Mecca and Medina. Those are the 2 holiest cities in all of Islam. Now, how does Israel get a hold of Mecca and Medina? Well, clearly Saudi Arabia can't be the Saudi Arabia of today for them to do that. And so both parties, and that's why I think Netanyahu, that's why he kicked off this war unexpectedly to the United States. Now, Trump, again, is he compromised? It sure seems like it. The whole Epstein files and everything going on, it does seem like Netanyahu in Israel has something on Trump. But what we know that Marco Rubio made apparent is that they thought Marco Rubio had a planned visit to Tehran Monday, this past Monday, which the war had already started by then. But so to the United States, they did not expect the war to start. They were getting ready to send another negotiation. And the rumor is from third parties, European parties that were at these negotiations, is that they were getting ready to make a deal. And what happens right before they have the weekend before they go, that Marco Rubio is going back to make a deal with Iran, Netanyahu calls Trump on Saturday and says, "We're going. You can either join us or not." Which then Trump is on his back foot. And what was already war gamed, according to Trump, is that U.S. military bases in the region would be under threat. So Netanyahu knowingly started the war knowing that the first targets with the older missiles that wouldn't be able to reach Iran would be hitting U.S. military bases right outside Iran. So wouldn't be able to reach Israel right out. So they hit the military bases outside Iran. So then the United States is forced to commit right away on Saturday. And it's like, we're just being led by Israel. This is Israel's war, and everybody knows it. And it's just like the Epstein situation to me as an American, right? The files get released. We can see who has committed these crimes and nothing happens. And now it's like 80% of the United States doesn't want to go to war, but somehow we're in war with Iran. And then the Christian Zionist base is incredibly enthusiastic. And we already, I don't know if you saw the post, but Pete Hegseth and various military commanders in the U.S. military said that Jesus Christ blessed Donald Trump to start Armageddon.
What? Who said that?
This was multiple. There was like 110 religious freedom reports inside the U.S. military that the day that the war began, multiple departments in the U.S. military, multiple leaders referred to this war as a holy war, and that Donald Trump was chosen by God to inaugurate Armageddon. Now, for the Christian Zionists, they believe they're going to be raptured up before Armageddon fully hits. So they're not going to be here for what they call the tribulation. So they get a free pass out of here to go, have a wonderful time, a utopian experience with God, until Jesus then stops the Antichrist from destroying Jerusalem. They believe that the Antichrist is going to then begin attacking the Jewish people, who Christ, when he comes back in his second coming, will prevent. That's the Christian Zionist perspective. So it's just, the whole thing is just absolutely insane. And the fact that the United States doesn't want to do it, but we're going full force with it, has just totally revealed that, which everybody already knew, that the Jewish lobbies, AIPAC, the Zionist lobbies, and Israel, Netanyahu, literally dictate foreign policy. I mean, it's an open secret in the United States that Jews run the Pentagon.
Yeah, I mean, there's also that video, you would have seen this, of Netanyahu getting caught on a hot mic and on a camera as well, saying basically the US is so easy to manipulate. We just manipulate them, and then they just basically follow our lead. It's like, the GTA sort of cover where was it Franklin, the guy in GTA San Andreas, who has the dog on the lead, the pit bull?
Oh, yeah.
It's like America's the pit bull.
Yep.
And Israel's Franklin.
Yep. No, that's exactly right. And that's what it's just so obvious now. I mean, think of how many billions of dollars, like the US just requested another 50 billion financial package to extend this war. We were told, Hegseth told us that it was going to last 4 to 5 days. And then day 6 comes and he says, well, it's going to last 4 to 5 weeks. And then, what was it, 2 days ago, there was a Trump representative that said, well, it could go till September. So that's 4 to 5 months. And so this was exactly what Rumsfeld said when we led up to the invasion of Iraq. He said, well, this will take about a week, at most maybe 6 weeks, but definitely not beyond 6 months. We'll be out by 6 months. Well, then we were there for about 20 years. So the same playbook
2 weeks
is
to slow
happening
the
now.
spread, brother.
Right. Which relates back to the clean break memo of Wesley Clark, of all these nations that Israel needs to undermine. Why? So that they can expand themselves and become the dominant hegemon in the region. That's the whole point. The whole point of Israel is to become the dominant hegemon. That's why they have no interest in saving these Arab states. And this is where I think this is going to backfire on Israel. What I believe is going to happen, just like we saw today, that the Prince of Saudi Arabia had reached out to Iran to establish negotiations, bypassing both Israel and the United States, is that this is going to lead, I believe, eventually to a unification of Shia and Sunni against the United States and Israel. So right now, what the goal of Israel was to play the Sunnis and the Shias off against each other.
Yep.
So the Shia, the Islamic regime of Iran, is about 20 to 25% of global Islam. So about 80% of Islam are Sunnis. That's the majority faith. And it all has to do with who's the successor after Muhammad. This is really what created. And you have to remember that the Persians are not Arabs. The Persians, the Iranians, are Indo-Europeans. Like, the average European has more genetic similarity to a Persian than they would to an Arab. And so Persia was dominated by the Arabs. They were forcibly converted. They were forced to take the faith of the Arabs. And that's why then they have their own flavor. Shia Islam is very much a Persian flavor of Islam. So what Israel wanted to do is play these two parties against each other, causing more and more chaos in the Middle East, and have them attack each other and destabilize both nations. Again, who does that benefit? Israel. But what I think is beginning to happen
around every time there's basically a country that is destabilized, you see that then there's a power vacuum that opens up and it starts the infighting.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And so I think what we're going to see is an alliance between Sunni and Shia Islam. They're going to say, okay, let's put our differences to a side, because the people who are destroying this region is the United States and Israel. And they're the ones that caused this whole region to go up in flames, which it is right now. And that was even mentioned by, I think, a foreign minister of Saudi Arabia today, that they blamed this conflict on the United States and Israel, that they just basically got the whole region engulfed in war after they made promises that XYZ was going to happen. Of course, it didn't fall through, because we're in total war. From the Islamic perspective, from the Iranian perspective, it's also eschatological.
Hmm.
They believe that they're fighting the great Satan of history. And so Shia Islam believes in the 12 imams, and that there's the last imam is what they refer to as the Mahdi. And he's going to be like essentially a world savior. He's
Yep.
going to unite the whole world under the
You got
banner
a
of
few of these
Islam.
guys pop up recently that they've thought were the Mahdi's, and then everyone's
Yes.
like, like holding them up and feathering them and everything.
Yes,
Yeah,
exactly.
I've seen a few of these. But yeah, it's interesting because they have another, like the worldview of the Muslims is that eventually this is why they have the concept of jihad. Jihad, like waging jihad, is to bring about the caliphate, right? So they had the Abbasid caliphate before and the Umayyad caliphate, and then they want another rise of the next caliphate. I think the Ottoman Empire was a caliphate, wasn't it? Or was meant to be a caliphate or something along those lines, but they want a rise of another caliphate. And whilst there's all of this infighting, they can't have a unified Islamic caliphate, which is what they essentially want at the end of the day. So yeah, when you say that, that's what comes to mind for me. I'm thinking, I hope that these guys don't unite and try and start a freaking global caliphate.
Well, I think that's where it's going, because we're already seeing the Gulf nations begin to reach out, bypass Israel and the United States to develop some type of relationship with Iran, or some type of agreement where they're not going to be bombing their residential areas, or give them the green light to attack the U.S. fortifications. So they already attacked like a CIA facility in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. They've attacked every U.S. military base except for the really big one in Bahrain, which almost was hit yesterday. There was 2 MiG fighters on their way from Iran to drop serious payload on that base. It has 10,000 American soldiers there.
Wow.
And what we're told is that the Arabs, using F-15s, American F-15s, were able to shoot them down 2 minutes before they reached the base. So that was like an existential crisis yesterday or the day before for the United States.
I've heard from reliable commentators that I listen to on this sort of stuff that Bahrain is having an existential crisis. Like Bahrain, that as a country or as a state could collapse.
Yeah, because you know why? Almost, I think last I saw was like 30, maybe 35% of their country is Shia Islam.
Right.
So they themselves, Bahrain, existed in this, again, because of the oil, because of the money and the opulence, were able to provide a standard of living for people where they didn't have Shia-Sunni conflict. But what did we see? As soon as the Ayatollah was killed, you have Shia Muslims in Bahrain attacking the Sunni police in Bahrain. And that's where, from the Israeli perspective, they're like, yes, this is exactly what we want. But now, if these Gulf nations begin to have some type of an agreement with Iran and become neutral states, which is what their goal is, to basically be a Switzerland in this conflict, they may be able to escape disaster in regards to the existence of their nations into the future. But they could also develop an alliance that'd be incredibly detrimental to Israel. And the one country that nobody's talking about is Egypt. What's Egypt going to do with all this? Egypt's right next to Israel, and part of the Sinai has to do with the Greater Israel Project. So Israel is outspoken that at some point they're going to be taking part of Egypt. And right now, there's been, through U.S. money, Egypt is like the second highest receiver of U.S. funds. First being Israel, of course. Second being Egypt. Now, why would second be Egypt? Well, because we're paying them off to have
this is
a
all
relationship
part of
with Israel.
This is all a part of the post 1970s. What was it called? The 7-Day War back in the 1970s. There was that the 7-Day War.
Yep.
And then so then the United States had to drop a big air shipment of weapons and of materials and supplies to the Israelis to basically allow them to survive, because they were going to lose that war. And then they bribed the Egyptians, and they said, well, you'll become the second biggest recipient of US aid after
Which
Israel.
has been the case ever since.
Yeah, and if you take this deal, and if you do a peace agreement with Israel, or if you, I don't know what the term for it is exactly, but they agree to not kill each other for a little while, then you'll get all this aid from the United States.
Right. And so that's the whole thing that's going to crumble. I mean, the United States doesn't have money to maintain this empire that they've created, to basically pay off all these powers, allow them to do what they want. And this war is going to expose the United States as unprepared. I mean, to many military analysts that I've been listening to from different parts of the world, The fact that they didn't recognize that they would be depleting their own missile system through the Shahed drones and didn't develop like its own U.S. drone technology to deal with these things at a cheap, effective way, shows that whatever they were planning was totally misguided. And it seems like they thought that these protests that Mossad and the CIA stirred up a month ago were legitimate, and that somehow the regime was getting ready to collapse, even though many people inside Iran saying that's not the case. There's a lot of support. Majority of people still support the regime. And so it appears they thought if they killed essentially the highest religious figure in Shia Islam, the Ayatollah, which not all Shias are in Iran, there's many in Iraq and various parts of the Middle East. That is, in a way, this is kind of facetious, but in a way, it's their Pope. He's the head of their religious identity. So the U.S. and Israel kill him, and then they take out the head of the general, the lead of the command, the top brass of Iran, thinking that, oh, then they'll just collapse. But they haven't. And they thought, well, if we take out their central command, then they'll collapse because they won't be able to coordinate their attacks. Well, Iran already planned for that. They decentralized their central command. So Tehran and Isfahan, they are coordinating, but if Tehran gets totally taken out, the war continues for Iran. All of Iran is divided into regions and have their own sort of central commands. That way, in case any one region gets annihilated, they can still defend themselves in this war. So the U.S. is already moving interceptor missiles, THAAD and Patriot system missiles from the Pacific theater in South Korea to the Middle East.
Yeah, I've heard
which
about
makes
that.
No
now
sense.
Well, I mean, because the Gulf states aren't as sort of reliable anymore. So they're now having to turn to South Korea. And then also you'd have to think about, well, what will the North Koreans think about that if the missile defense systems are being evacuated from South Korea? Maybe little Rocket Man will be rubbing his grubby little hands together.
Absolutely. If you're North Korea and China, and you're seeing that the U.S. didn't expect that they're going to be using so many missiles that they're depleting their own stockpile in the Pacific, which is there specifically to protect South Korea and Japan. That's the whole point of it. And Taiwan. Well, if you're China, you're kind of licking your lips regarding Taiwan. Oh, yeah. And if you're North Korea, I mean, you're licking your lips as well. I mean, because it just shows the unpreparedness of the United States, the facetiousness, the hubris. It's just ridiculous that they thought just bombing Iran when again, this regime's been there for decades. I mean,
it's 40, obvious.
50, 60 years.
But if you look at the history of it as well, I mean, obviously the CIA involvement in installing the Shah, and then that gets overthrown by the Ayatollah, more of a fundamentalist religious movement, because they don't like that sort of Western involvement that's going on. And then when the Ayatollah comes to power, that then kicks off the Iraq-Iran war, because Saddam and the Iraqis thought that the Iranians were vulnerable, and they thought, okay, we can take over Iran now. Didn't pan out for them because they had more resolve than they thought. They held on to power. And then it goes on. And they haven't really necessarily been involved in wars as much since then, but they've been building their proxy networks, and their proxy networks have been involved in these sorts of conflicts around the Middle East. You've got Hezbollah, you've got the Houthis, you've got Hamas, and you've got what's the PLC? What's it called? The one in Syria? I can't remember what the one in Syria was called.
The PLC or something
like that.
Yeah.
And so they've been building up their proxy networks, and then you'd imagine that they would have been fortifying themselves, because if you are aware of the clean break memo, for example, and if you've seen Iraq get taken out, you've seen Syria get taken. The Syrians are now the Assad regime. Bashar al-Assad had to flee Syria, but obviously there was a civil war there for decades, so that was long gone. And then
and mostly instigated by Israel, by the way.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
so remember the whole chemical gas attacks they claimed Assad did to his own people, and turned out it was the other side that was doing it to them.
Yep. Exactly. And then you've got it's all based on false intelligence and basically propaganda. Weapons of mass destruction as well. And then Libya too. Yep. Libya was the highest quality of life in Africa.
It was the gold standard in Africa. You had
even all the refugees
surrounded by his concubines. He famously only allowed women to be like his bodyguards. And as soon as he wanted to create a gold-backed pan-African currency, you see Hillary Clinton gleefully laugh and cackle as he gets sodomized and killed by his own people. That was, again, instigated by the United States. And now you literally have open slave markets in Libya.
Yeah. And it used to be the freaking port into Europe as well. Something a lot of people don't realize when they're looking around Naples and when they're looking around Paris and they're seeing all of these Africans everywhere. Well, one of the reasons why this has happened over the past 15 years or so is because of the fall of Gaddafi in Libya.
Right.
And then that port into Europe. Like people from Ethiopia and Sudan and Somalia and everything, they used to go to Libya and get work there. And because they had a lot of sort of civil infrastructure and civil projects happening in Libya, a lot of people used to go and work in Libya. And Gaddafi had a deal with the French and with the Europeans and with NATO that they wouldn't let Africans into Europe. They would stop them at Libya and either send them back or whatever. Gaddafi goes down, Libya power vacuum opens up, and all of a sudden they're basically roving gangs running Libya, and then all of these gangs that are taking people through the Sahara Desert from sub-Saharan Africa up into Libya, up into Algeria, and then into Europe is just going bananas. So that's one of the things that Europeans don't realize. Oh, well, some of them would, but a lot of people don't realize that the fall of Gaddafi was one of the big reasons why there's so many Africans in Europe now.
And he warned the West and Europe that was going to happen if they take him out. Yeah. That he was the bridgehead to stop mass African migration into their nations. And look what happened, exactly to your point. And again, was this accidental or was this kind of planned? Just like we saw they take out Assad in Syria, and what do we hear? Well, Syrian refugees going to Europe and the United States. Well, what did happen during after October 7th? A few months go by, and Israel says, well, we can just relocate them to the United States. What? So it's almost like a genocidal plan for the expansion of Israel and a destabilization of the first world. Which is part of Jewish eschatology, is that the Messiah is going to come to reestablish order in a massively chaotic world. So creating more global chaos, it benefits and creates the necessary conditions for their Mashiach to arrive.
I wish this didn't all make so much sense, dude. Like, I wish that there was I wish that there was a less sinister explanation for all of this. But yeah, the point we're making before about all of the different, like the history of the Ayatollah and the Iranian regime. Yeah, if they come into power in 1979, Saddam tries to exploit the weakness or the perceived weakness. They thought that they could go in there. It didn't work. They've been building all the proxy networks. They've been seeing all of these states fall all around them for the last sort of 50 years or so. They're going to be fortifying, and they're going to be building up their defense forces to the utmost extent. But the Ayatollah, from what I understand, had some sort of a religious conviction against nuclear weapons that the next guy may not have. But
yeah, his son. So they apparently, what we're being told is that they've installed his son, or his grandson rather, his grandson as the new Ayatollah. And he is much more right-wing and hardcore than Khomeini was. So yeah, it was, again, the irony, right? The whole point is to prevent Iran from using nuclear weapons. The sole voice in Iran preventing them from actually implementing that was the Ayatollah. And so we kill him. Well, what do you think the response is? It's going to be nuclear war. It almost gives Israel another pretext to utilize their nukes, which technically they don't have, but the whole world knows they have. Getting back to the whole Kennedy assassination and stuff like that, but that's another rabbit hole for another day. But
yeah, the other thing that I think is really interesting about this, but not this particular topic, but the broader global implications for all of this, it's like I was saying before, I wish that it didn't make so much sense, but it really does make a lot of sense when you think about it. These wars that have been, Israel's wars that America has participated in and that America has helped Israel in, they have caused the mass immigration from the third world into the Western world. They've got the mass immigration from the Middle East and all of these various different Middle Eastern countries through Turkey into Europe, and then the fall of Gaddafi in Libya means that sub-Saharan Africans and other parts of Africa through Africa into Europe, the United States as well, Australia, all of these different places have been now flooded with Muslim and African immigrants, but particularly the Muslim ones, so that when this conflict really does kick off, you now have assets throughout Europe, assets
Right.
throughout the United States, assets throughout Australia that have the, like, we see in Australia huge marches through Sydney and Brisbane and these sorts of places of militant Muslims screaming Allahu Akbar because of
Mhm.
what is going on in Gaza at the moment. So it seems to me like there's just armies and armies of young men who actually don't like the Western countries that they're in at all and who are just sort of waiting for the call.
Right. I mean, well, we have Dearborn, Michigan here in the United States, which is one of, but usually the preeminent Muslim majority city in the United States. And they do the call to prayer and all that different stuff. Well, there's, I mean, countless videos of their leaders talking about how their whole reason there is to eventually take over the United States, that the average American is deracinated, they have no identity, they're rootless, they don't have religion, the culture's degenerate and hedonistic, which I actually can't disagree with much of that. But because of that, they are going to dominate, and it's just a matter of submission, it's just a matter of numbers. And they are certainly having more children than the average Westerner, no matter what nation you pick. So from their ideology, theologically, Islam and globalism coincide. If you want to put Muslims in different parts of the world, if you're trying to destabilize, because their ideology is that they have to conquer the world. That's what brings, ironically, Jesus back for the Muslims, because Jesus is the judger of Muslim eschatology, and so he'll eventually come back and condemn all the Christians for not being Muslims. But their ideology is that they have to spread to non-Muslim nations and convert those nations. That's part of the ethos of Islam. So if you want to destabilize Europe, if you want to destabilize the West, it would make sense to destabilize these nations and then flood these third worlders or whoever it may be into these first world nations and allow them to be in enclaves where they don't have to assimilate. If it was a slower point of migration, no matter where they're from, eventually people could assimilate, but that's not what's happening. This isn't just a few thousand people here or there. We're talking about millions and millions of people. And the only country to really stand up in regards to the Islam question is Japan. I don't know if you saw their new prime minister. They banned mosques. They banned halal food. You can't even get Muslim halal food in Japan because they don't want Muslims there. And one of the representatives just made a statement. He said, look at Europe. We don't want to be Europe. We don't want Muslims here. Like, you'd never hear that rhetoric and actually the implementation of those policies in any Western nation. It's almost like we're controlled by people that are allowing the slow collapse of all these nations.
Yeah, man, it is pretty based when you look at Japan over there. I mean, it makes total sense though, but they're basically saying, look, the birth rates are low. We get it. The birth rates are really low. We're going to try and do what we can. But if not, we're going out like Thelma and Louise, just off the cliff, no Muslims, and just
good for them though.
Yeah, we're going out in a blaze of glory. We're not going to be replacing our labor force with the third world populations. But DPH, just before we carry on, I'm going to just quickly read out a bunch of the super chats that have come in. Ahead. So over on DPH side, we've got a few memberships coming in from Seraphim Goose, new member, and Gorilla Biscuits donated one to each channel. Thank you, sir. John over on DPH says, DPH, have you done a video on Gog and Magog?
I have not. I should do that in the future.
And David James gifted another Logos membership. Josiah says, can't listen to the whole stream, but so glad we have this for when I can. Keep up the good work. Thank you, brother. Witzius donated 10 Rattlesnake TV memberships. Thank you, sir. And Austin over on DPH side says, Cotel taxes. Send them in, you cheap pricks. A few more over on your side. Chris Scott sends 5. And then Hatter Hanzo says, the Iraq-Iran war is worth looking into. Perhaps a stream topic. Good look at the Arabian Persian divide and geopolitical manipulation by USA and Israel.
Great point.
Yeah, I've heard that a lot of what happened in Iraq was basically Saddam being spoken to in both ears. One side saying, you go for it, do your thing, go into the Gulf states, into Kuwait, go into Iran. Then in the other side, they're basically planning how to take him out at the same time.
Right. And that's where the whole weapons of mass destruction. I mean, my God, we funded the Iraqis against the Iranians. We knew what he had,
Yeah.
and that's where Netanyahu, weapons of mass destruction. I mean, it's so ridiculous now looking back, because now we know that the U.S. knew the whole time they didn't have those. It was just another fake propagandist pretext for war that we were told was going to last weeks, that lasted, multiple decades.
Yeah, and it gets into the whole thing about why would anybody trust the West? Why would anybody trust the Israelis or the United States when they're going into negotiations with them? Like,
right.
there is no basis to trust them about absolutely anything. So if you're going to come in and say, look, we want you guys to denuclearize, we want you guys to stop enriching uranium, and then we're going to basically put in all these safeguards for you, you'd basically just think that, well, the likelihood is that they're just going to turn around and completely, go back on their word. So why would they do that? Why would they want to listen to you?
And look what happened with Iran. Both times they negotiated led to the U.S. attacking them unexpectedly. And then look at Russia and Ukraine. Trump promised that he was going to end that conflict within a single day. Well, they met in Alaska. Apparently, there was an agreement reached between the United States and Russia. And then when Trump was to bring this to the EU, the European leaders then wanted more concessions on the Russian agreement that they just made with the U.S. And then when Trump calls Putin back and says, well, here's the agreement, they get pissed because, like, no, that's not what we shook on in Alaska. We shook on this. And it was actually a very generous offer by Russia. They were going to give away 2 territories that they currently occupy with the declaration of the West that they would own the Donbass region. And of course, that led to nothing. And what happens? Well, then Putin gets targeted at Novgorod at his personal residence. And it was like, 116 Ukrainian drones were sent. About 90 of them were shot down by the Russians. A handful were able to make it to his residential house there, where they took out a large portion of the house. Well, what came out after that is that the CIA and MI6 were the ones that were doing the targeting. So if you're Russia, if you're Putin, you go to Alaska, you come up with an agreement, then Trump changes the agreement upon talking to the Europeans, and then weeks later, there's a drone attack on your personal residence, and you find out that the CIA and MI6 were the ones behind the whole operation. I mean, you can't trust America, know, and I am a proud American. I'm just not proud of what we have now. And why would you trust the United States? And why would you trust Trump? You cannot trust the Trump administration at this point. So it just puts the whole American empire in a very precarious situation. And all the enemies of the American military industrial complex are seeing that it's a lot weaker than it portrayed itself.
Yeah. Amelia sent 28 and said, love to see this collab. DPH return to Babylon is fantastic. I still need to go and get one of them, man.
Thank you very much, Amelia.
And John says for 10, why isn't everyone concerned with Burkina Faso, Sao Tome and Principe, Nauru or Comoros? I'm assuming that these are all conflicts going on in
Africa.
In Africa. I mean, they wouldn't have the same sort of geopolitical or
those are more regional things. That does not have the geopolitical effect that the war of Iran has.
Yeah, not even close. And also, just in terms of, you were talking before about the US dollar, for example, and about the sort of de-dollarization. This is another one that people who are sort of like almost like United States chauvinists in a sense, they believe that America is and always will be the global superpower. And at the moment, it is the most powerful in the world, you could say. But China is becoming a peer. China is becoming a real, and people have their different views on China. Some people view China as basically a bubble at the moment, and with their birth rate collapse and with their population and demographic collapse and with like the sort of fake economy that is being propped up, that perhaps they're not as powerful as they think. Other people view China as a real contender to the United States, massive military. They're not just the place that you go for cheap stuff anymore, because now they're outsourcing. China used to be, during like the start of the neoliberal era, used to be the place where you'd go and get lots of cheap goods made. But now that's not so much the case anymore. The living standards and the wage standards have gone up in China, and now they're outsourcing that to Laos and to Vietnam and to Africa, and their Belt and Road Initiative is really strong. So I see the arguments from both sides here, but China are at least a peer, and they're at least not going to be beaten up. It's like the little brother sort of growing up a little bit and being able to throw a nice left hook. You can't just push them around like you used to. And so now they're creating the BRICS alliance: Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. You've also got other countries like Iran, for example. It's
in the OPEC nations. Many of the Gulf nations are in on BRICS.
They are. Same with Turkey as well.
Right.
So it's like there is a big contingent of countries who are saying, all right, we can't necessarily rely on the West and the United States, and Israel has to be a part of that calculation, because they're so duplicitous in negotiations, and also because they will just utilize all of these sanctions every time something goes wrong. They've utilized sanctions on Russia and Venezuela and Cuba and all these different countries. So then the nations in BRICS are saying, well, we need to de-dollarize. We need to make sure that the US dollar isn't the global reserve currency, or at least it's weakened so that they don't have as much sanctioning power. At least, well, that's like the sort of cursory understanding of it.
Right. And that it's that soft power, how the US has ruled the world post World War II.
Yeah, exactly. So this war is another reason. Now you've got the Gulf states. So this makes me think that all of these Gulf states that are vassal states of the USA, and even, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, Bahrain, UAE, all of these countries are more siding with the West, Egypt as well. What happens if they lose the support of those countries, and those countries start to sort of side more with the BRICS alliance and with that sort of emerging Eastern power that's happening? But yeah, you go for it, man. There's a lot to chew on there.
Yeah. So regards to the de-dollarization, I think that is a trend that isn't going to stop. And that's what Trump, as soon as he took office, was trying to combat this. One way early in the administration, this is like January, February of last year, was the U.S. became one of the largest purchasers of gold. And so much gold was being moved from London to the United States. People were speculating, well, why is the U.S. doing this? Well, if you remember, Elon Musk, when Doge was going on, was making cryptic tweets about Fort Knox. Where's the gold in Fort Knox? We should do an audit of the gold in Fort Knox. And even Trump was behind it. And then that quickly went silent, because it's believed that much of the gold of Fort Knox was sold, and the larger recipient of that was Israel. So we don't have as much gold as we had during World War II, and we paid off a lot of debts to the Europeans in World War II. Like a lot went to France, for example. So Trump was trying to find a new way to back the U.S. fiat currency. And one of the ways that was speculated is that Bessent and the Secretary of the Treasury was going to acquire as much gold as possible, and then crypto, that's what the crypto reserve was for, and then utilize that as a basis for U.S. debt. So use that as leverage to the U.S. debt, which had never been done in U.S. before. When we had Fort Knox full of gold, we didn't use that as a balance to the U.S. debt. We weren't in that much debt back then. But as a way to get us out of debt, that was one of the things that was believed going to happen. Now, from what I'm hearing, is they're moving forward with a cryptocurrency, and getting a digital currency is one of the ways that they're just going to allow the US dollar to collapse and just transition to this digital currency as a way to sort of salvage the empire. So BRICS is trying to do exactly that. And there's been this race amongst nations to acquire gold. Well, Venezuela has a lot of gold. And if you saw just a couple of days ago, one of the largest shipments of gold was coming to the United States from Venezuela. So you can see there's a game under the game. Russia and China have been acquiring gold at a very large rate. And so if they transition to a global gold-backed currency, the game is who has the most gold. And so that's where the U.S., I believe, was trying to offset what's getting ready to happen, because already the OPEC nations were beginning to trade oil in the yuan, which is the Chinese currency. And if that's the case, I mean, without the OPEC dollar, without the U.S. being the oil dollar, the entire empire is going to go under, because all the bonds, all the debt that the U.S. has issued, that's what's keeping this thing afloat. Obviously, fiat currency and central banking is fractional banking is built on debt. Yeah. So the idea is, well, why don't we get out of this usury system, which the whole world is under through the central banks, and get back to a gold standard global currency, which sort of levels the entire playing field? Well, that would be detrimental to the United States and the entire structures that are put in place right now. So you see the West, that's where, and who are the countries that the central banks are not in? Venezuela was one. Cuba is one. Trump has already said they're going after Cuba next. Iran is one. Russia is one. China is one. So you see, oh, okay. So many of the enemies of the empire are all ones that have their own bank.
That's why I was sort of, when that Venezuela thing happened, I was like, look, it's in the American sphere of influence. You can, like, if you're looking at it from a purely pragmatic standpoint, right? America is predicting that there's going to be a war, some sort of a conflict between East and West over the coming decades. They need to secure their supply. So if I was them, I'd be looking, saying Venezuela, one of the most oil-rich places in the whole entire world. It's in our sphere of influence. They're communists. We don't care much for Latin American communism. We're going to go and have our fingers in that pie. Greenland as well, another place that is rich in natural resources, not really being utilized. We want to secure all of the resource-rich places in our sort of sphere of influence here. You can understand that from like a purely pragmatic point of view, that why the United States would be doing that, right?
Right, and of course we saw that as soon as the U.S. got a hold of the oil fields in Venezuela, massive shipments of crude oil were going to Israel. So now Israel they can have their energy and not be dependent upon the OPEC nations, which makes sense if a plan was to destabilize those nations as well. Now, for the United States, destabilizing OPEC is not beneficial for the U.S. empire. And so, again, looking at the war game of all this stuff, you could see another line of thought of how what's going on with the Straits of Hormuz could actually be beneficial for the United States. Now, it's going to raise, as we've already seen, oil prices around the entire globe. But China, like 50 to 75% of their oil comes from Iran. They're the majority consumer of Iranian oil. Now, their Chinese ships have ported in Iran and been allowed to go by U.S. carriers and stuff like that. But here's the thing. If the strait is shut down and China isn't able to access its oil, and let's say the OPEC nations fall, well, the U.S. will still be in a good energy position because we are trying to build out our oil. Alberta, Canada is trying to secede from Canada. And if they do, we can build the oil pipeline, the Keystone pipeline that's been theorized about for the last 30 years, is having a direct oil pipeline from northern Canada all the way to the United States to make us energy independent. Well, you can see how from the U.S. standpoint, losing the OPEC nations could be bad. But what might be beneficial is that China is going to be in a real problem, because the weakest part about the Chinese empire is that they are energy dependent. They do not have energy. And if the United States was able to destabilize that region, that's going to cause a major problem for the maintenance of the Chinese economy and, everything that's Chinese society, if they're not going to be able to receive all the Iranian oil. So you can see how the play for Venezuela may have been a strategic play before this war to then make sure that the U.S. is in control of two serious amounts of oil, where we can, if that whole section of the world is caught on fire, we'll still have our own oil. And Israel will get the oil from Venezuela.
Yeah, well, also that's another destabilizing factor for the Chinese as well, because guess whose diplomats were in Venezuela at the time of Maduro's capture? It was the Chinese were in town at the time, and they were working pretty closely with the Venezuelans. So that was another, like you said, China are dependent on Iran, for example. And one of the things that has been really great for China is that whilst the US has been sanctioning the Iranians over the past however long, China have been getting cheap sanctioned oil because they've been like the main consumer of Iranian oil. Right. So the shutdown of the Hormuz Strait is terrible for the Chinese. They're going to have to now look to Russia to get all of that, coincidentally as well. The other place,
which is the irony of all this, is that India is now buying all their oil from Russia, and Russia, they're happy about it. They're gleeful. My gosh, they're raking in so much money right now.
Yeah, flying, dude.
They're totally
Things have never
fine.
been better. Like for the Russians, it's crazy because the West thought that they were going to be putting all of this pressure on them through sanctions, but it's actually all worked out in the Russians' favor because now they have they are just selling more oil than they can freaking produce nearly. The economy is doing well over there. It's not great. Like the Russian economy hasn't been great. It's like since the fall of the Soviet Union, it's quite the project getting that back up and about. But you know, it's not terrible.
No.
So yeah, it's. I mean, this is
it's doing better than it was before the Ukraine war.
Yeah,
it's in a better position now before the war started. So all the Western sanctions, and that's what really broke. I mean, the whole U.S. narrative that they can just sanction these nations and like limit their abilities. Well, we fully sanctioned Russia at the beginning of the war. And they then were forced to develop an anti-fragile, non-Western economy where they can fund themselves outside of the Western sphere. And now they've done that. They've essentially established that. They made an agreement with China where they're building a pipeline of Russian oil to China. India's buying their oil and their grain sales. So the Russian economy is very agricultural and energy dependent. Those are their main exports. But they still have an industrial base. You see, that's what makes Russia in a better position than the United States. We don't even have an industrial base. That's where Trump had an emergency meeting today with Raytheon and all these different, military contractors that they are like quadrupling the speed at which they produce ammunition and missiles. So, but the problem is, we have to build the factories. Yeah. That was in Trump's post. Oh, all the states are vying for who's going to get the plants. Okay, so you're telling me this is what a 5 to 10 year project? You got to build the plants and then start building the ammunition. So we have totally castrated ourselves. When when Bill Clinton started to export all industrial labor to the rest of the world for cheaper goods, the idea was that we were going to basically have this service finance economy, which is what we have in America right now, because we don't have the industrial base we used to. So we live in basically a Wall Street economy of consumer goods, cheap consumer goods that are produced in China. And that's what keeps the U.S. afloat. That's why Trump has been trying to leverage through tariffs entry into the U.S. market, because we consume the most goods. But
yeah, but if you look at it, it's like Trump and the United States. People think, well, yeah, manufacturing, and yeah, you need to have some sort of an industrial manufacturing base, but you want to be manufacturing things like cars, for example. You want to be manufacturing big important things. Like, you're not going to go back to manufacturing textiles and cottons and t-shirts and these sorts of things. That's just not going to happen. You're past that. But at least you want to have some sort of a manufacturing base of cars. You can't have this insurance, finance, debt economy forever. It's just not going to last, because when the shit hits the fan, the countries who really do make things, like in Australia and in America, we had to get all of our masks from China at the time when the Rona happened. We couldn't make anything. It just showed the fragility of the economy at that time. We don't really.
It shows you the weakness of the Chinese economy, right? So what is China dependent upon? The rest of the world buying their cheap goods.
Yeah.
So you see the interdependence of the global economy is that China does not have the energy resources. That's their Achilles heel. But they have all the manufacturing in the world. I mean, they are the largest manufacturer. So they are dependent upon the rest of the world buying their goods. That's where, I had a conversation with Professor Jiang Shui Qin of predictive history, and he's limited in what he can probably say about the CCP. And I can bring up something regarding Siberia, which connects with Orthodox prophecies, because I'm sure eventually we're going to get into Turkey and the Orthodox Christian perspective of all these events. But he made the point that China really is not in some advantageous position against the U.S., where I was talking about all the bonds that they hold. And he was making the point that, but all their industry is dependent upon the United States and these tech companies. He was talking about, DeepSeek and ChatGPT and Grok, and how all the AI is being built by the same people. His argument was, because we are in a sense in a sort of Manhattan Project, an arms race for what they believe is artificial general intelligence. I don't think it's possible. That's part of my book, Return to Babylon. But that's what the transhumanists, that's what the tech elite believe. Well, the same people developing our AI are developing the AI over in China. So there's this weird relationship where China is an antagonistic enemy of the US empire, to put it that way. But at the same time, they're dependent upon it existing. And uh, so much of their IP, their intellectual property, is either stolen or in collaboration with the West.
Yeah.
So, you know, eventually, I believe that these two parties will go to war. But you see how it's so interconnected. And this was the belief of the post World War II era, is that we have to create a globally interconnected economy that's so tight that nations won't war against each other because it would be detrimental to them. Well, we're in that interconnected global world, but it certainly hasn't stopped the existence of warfare, as they promise, these sort of modern utopian myths that they tell everyone.
Yeah, right. It's I can't remember what exactly it was, but I was listening to something the other day that was talking about the AI bubble and about how this war could seriously affect the AI bubble. I can't remember what it was. It was some sort of like a resource or a technology that was going to.
Yeah, the energy these data centers take. Now,
Yeah.
again, if the U.S. was to establish like the Keystone Pipeline, which would take years to build, but if they did finish the Keystone Pipeline and we're getting oil from Venezuela and we're getting oil from, the Gulf of Texas, that we would be essentially energy independent. However, these data centers, to fuel the AI that they're trying to create, necessitates these massive centers of processing, which takes immense amount of water and energy. So the whole point was that the theory was the shutting off the Strait of Hormuz and the rising of oil prices is actually going to hamper the possibility of the progression of all these tech elites and what they're trying to do, because they need all these data centers, but we're not going to have enough energy, or the energy will be too expensive in the first place for these data centers to exist. So that was the theory about this potentially being a fallout of the AI. Who knows if that's the case? Obviously, Trump, one of the first things he did upon taking office was the Stargate project, which was a $500 billion investment of U.S. money into Sam Altman of ChatGPT, Larry Ellison of Oracle, and a Japanese man, I forget what his name was, but essentially it's the race for the U.S. to achieve AGI. So is this going to affect the data centers and development of AI in the West? Very possibly. If the energy situation in the U.S. gets, situated and stabilized in one way or another, I could see that continuing forward. But for the entire world, because Russia is building AI, all these nations are building their own AI. They're going to necessitate more and more and more energy to get these things to operate the way they want. So the whole energy crisis could be a total wrench in the development of AI, or it could be a total wrench for certain nations, and other nations are abundant in oil and become wealthy from it. That's kind of the one analyst I listened to. He was speculating that was one of the long-term goals of the U.S. is to become a nation selling energy and oil as opposed to consuming it.
Yeah. I mean, there's just so many moving parts, isn't there? I mean, there are
Yeah.
so many moving parts and so many different nations that are being pulled in both different directions. And you wonder if the Israelis have overplayed their hand. I was listening to actually Fuentes clip the other day on X, and he was giving this comedic take, and it was really funny when he was talking about people overstating the power of the Iranians, saying, well, they're saying that the Iranians are going to, pull out this sort of missile on that missile, and then we're gonna be here in like the AI cyber world in 100 years time with a collar on our neck, thinking, now Netanyahu the fourth will get it now. And it was a funny take, but you do wonder if at some point the Israelis do overplay their hand, and if the global consensus turns against them. But there's on the one hand, people think that is the case, that you've got this Eastern Bloc, these emergent global powers, this multipolar world that's going to be able to challenge the hegemony of the United States and the Israelis. But then on the other hand, you have the people who think, well, no, they're just too powerful. The United States are too strong. It's a global hegemon like we've never seen before. And they'll be able to just literally nuke Iran or any challenges out of orbit if they try to if they try any of that sort of stuff, if there's a last resort that's needed.
Right. That's the real debate. How powerful is the United States military? I mean, do we have weapons that we haven't utilized? Could we annihilate Iran right now if we want to? Absolutely. But if the U.S. uses a nuclear weapon or Israel, that brings in the rest of the world, right? So from my Orthodox Christian perspective, as we talked about last time we were together, I talked how I believe this stuff was going to unfold, and in many ways, everything has kind of fallen into place. Well, we believe that this is the beginning of World War III. Now, I am declaring that we're already in it because this domino has already fallen. The lid is off. We're in total war between Israel and Iran. And we're already seeing, France has joined, the UK has joined, other nations have joined. Russia and China have already said that they're providing logistics and intelligence for the Iranians. So we're already in a war that is already split. From the Orthodox perspective, this global war is between the United States, Europe, and Israel versus Russia, China, Iran, most specifically. So we've already seen that the powers that the saints and the elders have said was going to be the case already has emerged and is the case. And we believe that this is going to lead to a larger conflict, that this is going to just continue to develop from a regional war to eventually a global war. Now, in many ways, we're already in it because there's a live battle right now going on in Ukraine. So we have the US and NATO fighting on multiple fronts in Ukraine against the Russians. And then we have the US and Israel fighting multiple fronts against the Iranians. In many ways, we're already in the Great World War, what I would refer to as World War III. But from the Orthodox perspective, this is certainly going to lead into full-blown war with Russia, China, Iran, and it's going to be focused on Turkey. So we mentioned this at the beginning, and we talked about it backstage. Where does Turkey fit into all this stuff? Now, from the Orthodox perspective, Constantinople is the capital of the Christian world. Now, obviously, if you're a Western Catholic, you'd say it's Rome. Okay, fair enough. But from the Orthodox Christian perspective, which is the perspective I'm going to be providing here, it's Constantinople, modern day Istanbul. We believe, and this has been a series of prophecies and visions and warnings from saints and elders, that first, what would begin is that Israel would bomb the nuclear facilities of Iran. Technically, that already happened in June of last year. And it said that would be the first domino towards the Great World War. Following that, and eventually again, this ongoing conflict with Iran and diminishing Iran, what they refer to as the Persians, would then focus on Anatolia, modern day Turkey. And we already said that all these figures of Israel began 2 weeks before the Iran war talking about how Turkey's next. And so Erdogan, we have multiple saints referring to Erdogan and say, watch when he steps down. This is the next domino to fall, is that whether he's assassinated, we're told that he has cancer. He hasn't made a public appearance in a while. So whether he's sick, he dies, he resigns, he's voted out, something's going to happen where Erdogan is no longer the leader of Turkey. And he's been there for multiple decades. And Erdogan is a sort of moderate Islamic figure. The history of Turkey, which was formerly the Ottoman Empire, highly religious, the Sultan, all that different stuff. Well, once Ataturk comes along, and once we get into the 20th century, Turkey becomes an incredibly secular Muslim nation, right? It's one of the unique features of Turkey, comparing it to Iran or Saudi Arabia, is that Turkey's goal was to be secular. They wanted to be modern people. And so originally, like, you could be actually, jailed for wearing too much religious regalia, too much Islamic regalia back in the day in Turkey. Now that the secularism has subsided some, and you have more conservative fundamental Islamists. And so Erdogan is that moderate figure that ties the secularist dimension of the Turkish world with the more Islamic, more fanatical, more conservative and traditional. So and that's where he's got all this criticism from his own people that he didn't do anything for the Gazans, right? Erdogan would make a speech. It's terrible what, there's a genocide going on. It's terrible what Israel does to the Palestinians. And then they do nothing. And then when they ousted Assad and they used the Al-Qaeda, former Al-Qaeda leader, al-Jabari, for the new president of Syria, there was a negotiation between Erdogan and Netanyahu to divide up Syria. So Turkey took northern sections. Israel took their southern sections, and then the Al-Qaeda leader has the rest of the country, and then the U.S. has military bases throughout Syria. So Erdogan, we believe, represents this moderate Islamic faction that once he steps down, the Kemalists, which are the party of Ataturk, they are very secular, they are more progressive, and they're very pro-Western. We believe they're going to take power of Turkey. And once they take power of Turkey, because Turkey is a NATO nation, that's why Iran bombing, they've sent, there's been 2 incidents in Turkey so far throughout the war, and that's the first NATO country that was actually attacked by Iran. So Turkey is a NATO nation. When the Kemalists take power, we believe that they're going to side with Israel and the United States and Europe in this conflict, and they're going to shut the Bosphorus Strait to Russia. Now, Russia in Sevastopol and Crimea, that's the capital of their navy. So they have to get through Istanbul, the Bosphorus Strait, to get out to the Aegean Sea, where all the Greek islands are, and the rest of Turkey and Cyprus. That part of the Mediterranean is called the Aegean. And so when they close the Bosphorus Strait on behalf of the West to prevent Russia sending their military south towards the Holy Land, Russia is going to annihilate Turkey. And this is the full-blown war, the World War III. And we believe that a third of the Turks are going to perish, a third are going to convert to Orthodoxy, and a third are going to flee back into the Middle East. And in the consequences, and we believe millions and millions of people are going to die in this great world war, that the end point, the end result of all this stuff is that Turkey is essentially going to be destroyed, and Constantinople will be given back to the Greeks. Which Greeks, I mean, Anatolia is historically Christian land. That was the Byzantine Empire. You have so many saints. You know, the Council of Nicaea, that's in Anatolia. That's modern day Turkey. So much of Christian history actually has taken place in parts of Turkey and Syria and all of the Levant. So all of from the Nile north. And this is going to be precipitous of this massive, massive war. Now, in America, the prophecy is that we are not going to have boots on the ground from other nations. The Russians, the Chinese, even though we will be at full-blown world war with these nations, they're not going to put boots on the ground in North America. We believe what's going to happen, according to the Saints, is that a geological event is going to occur. Many have speculated that it could be the volcano in Yellowstone that has been speculated for the last 50 years. They're saying, it's building up. And if this thing was to explode, it would be a massive cataclysmic disaster for the United States, polluting the air, all this different stuff. Millions of people would die if that volcano were to explode. Some type of maybe it's not that. I'm not even speculating that's the thing, but we believe could be a massive tsunami across California, whatever it may be. There's going to be massive geological events, which are catastrophic. And then there's going to be civil war. And the US dollar and the American economic system is going to collapse. That is going to be the turmoil of the United States, is economic collapse and then full-blown civil war in the face of a geological climactic disaster. So at the end of all this, though, eventually things will resolve. Now, China is going to backstab Russia, is what we believe, because, and this is what I was getting back to with Professor Jiang of Predictive History. I asked him about this. There's a territory in Siberia. Now, I just told you that China is energy dependent. Mm-hmm. They want aspects of Siberia so they can have their own oil. They can have their own natural gas, which they don't have right now. And on Chinese maps, there's already parts of territory that are declared part of China. Now, if you look at a world map, it shows that it's part of Russia. Now, the Saints have said this for, countless years leading up to this conflict. All these things that I'm saying were decades before this stuff has come to fruition. They say that China is going to backstab Russia during the end of this conflict, which is going to take out Russia by the West, and allow, again, some type of Western power to flank the Russian troops and gain their backside and essentially annihilate them, allowing then no resistance for China to take over Siberia all the way to the Urals. So we believe that all this stuff is building up. And the next two things for Orthodox Christians to see, again, you don't have to believe anything I'm saying. I'm coming from a position of faith that this is our tradition. This is what we believe is happening. The reason why Professor Jiang of Predictive History was even on my YouTube channel was he wasn't aware of all the Orthodox eschatology. And upon learning it through a handful of my streams, he wanted to have a conversation because he said it mapped the best to what he uses game theory. I don't know if he's religious at all. I doubt that he is. He's a Chinese professor, educated in the West from Canada. But I asked him about all this stuff, and he didn't want to acknowledge the whole Siberia thing. But he highlighted that this third Rome, because we believe that Moscow became the third Rome after the fall of Constantinople in 1453. He said that worldview matches the best to all his predictive theories based on game theory. And that's why we had the conversation. But, you know, don't have to, I know that this is coming from a position of faith, so I don't expect everyone to adopt what my belief system is or expect it. But here's the two things I would say. If you're skeptical, watch out for these and see if I'm right. We believe that Erdogan is going to step down in the near future and the Kemalists are going to take power. You can fact check me on that one. The second one is that Turkey is going to become aggressive towards the Greeks, and they're going to begin to take islands that are technically Greek territories. Now, Turkey has already taken the northern section of Cyprus, and that's where, you know, Cyprus has already been attacked because they had a UK base by Iran, and that's where the European powers are trying to protect Cyprus, another NATO nation. So you get, again, question me, be skeptical, but if those two things happen, those are my two predictions based on the Orthodox worldview. Turkey is going to become aggressive towards Greece. Erdogan's going to step down in one way or another, and the Kemalists are going to take power. And if those things come to fruition, one, you should take what I say a little bit more seriously if they do happen. But two, realize that that is fully setting the stage for this conflict that's going to merge, that which we believe is truly World War III. Now, how does this relate to the Antichrist? World War III occurs. We believe that this is going to reset the entire global structure, because for Antichrist to emerge, there has to be a central global political and economic system. Because for the Jews, their Messiah is a political and military leader, right? He's not, Christ was the opposite of that. And that's why they didn't see him as the fulfillment of the prophecies as Messiah. So their Messiah is much more worldly than what we believe the Messiah is in regards to Christ. So resetting the entire global framework, which I've already said, I believe that the US dollar is going to collapse, the military industrial complex, the entire American empire is falling apart right now, and I believe it's going to continue to, that is a prerequisite for the new digital unified global currency to take place. In the what they're going to claim is that that's going to prevent us from going to war again, right? We have to have a new global political system so that we don't have another war, because this will be the last and final war, World War III. Now, we don't know how many years it's going to take. One elder mentioned 30 to 35 years. After the Great World War, Orthodoxy will go through this golden age. Many people are going to convert around the world, which we're already seeing in the Western world. In America, it's one of the fastest growing faiths is Eastern Orthodoxy, especially amongst young men. But we're seeing it in Germany, England, Ireland, France, Australia. And so this is a phenomenon that's already occurring. We believe that as we move through the Great World War, and then on the other side of that, Orthodoxy will prosper. But during that period, the entire global system that the Antichrist will rule from is going to be implemented, is going to be built. So that's why the World War is a prerequisite to eventually Antichrist coming, which, again, we don't put a date on that, but it's well into the future after the Great World War. This isn't like, we're not, evangelical. We don't believe in the rapture. We don't believe any of this stuff. We don't predict dates. We predict events. The saints give us events, but we don't know when and where those are going to happen. They're just signposts that when they do happen, like Israel bombing Iran's nuclear facilities, which was said before Iran had nuclear facilities by St. Paisios and St. Theodorus, that would eventually precipitate this whole structure. So it all culminates eventually in the Antichrist, which we believe will be the Jewish Messiah. And he will be a Jew, and he will rule the world from Jerusalem, and they will have a global digital currency, which will be the basis for the mark of the beast and all that different stuff.
Damn, dude. I'm going to have to just give a shout out right now to Cute Animal Vids 65, who sent 300 to the church saying, "Thank you for all the priceless
Wow.
info that you gave out for free." And that is
Holy
particularly relevant
shit.
right now, man, because that is so true. That is priceless info for free. Thank you for the big dono to the church over there,
Oh,
Cute
thank you very
Animal
much, man. That
Vids.
is
Appreciate
very
that.
generous.
But yeah, dude. So the thing that I was really interested that you said there was about the Greeks getting Constantinople back. So the idea here is that that Erdogan steps down and that the Turkish side with the Israelis and the Americans, and then it becomes more like westernized, and then it's like the return of Constantinople.
Yeah, because again, if you believe in the third Rome theory, Russia believes itself to be the protector of Orthodox Christians worldwide, since they are the greatest, they're the only Orthodox superpower that exists. And so we believe that even though Greece will be on the side of Europe, the US, and Israel during this conflict, Russia is not going to attack the Greeks because they're Orthodox brothers. And because Russia is going to totally annihilate Turkey, and there's going to be conflict, the United States and Russia will meet in Turkey, in Anatolia, and all this devastation that's going to occur from it, that there won't be that many people left. There won't be enough people to actually run Anatolia and keep Constantinople, modern day Istanbul. And so, out of necessity, it will be given back to the Greeks, which is part of their whole cultural narrative that is embedded within the mythos of who they are, that eventually they will be restored back to Constantinople, which is really, at least in many ways, the epitome of Greek culture, was the height of the Byzantine Empire. It was Christian orthodoxy ruled the Mediterranean. So this is what we believe will eventually occur. And in that process, even though Turkey and Greece will be technically on the same side, Turkey will begin to take lands from Greece by extending what we refer to as the nautical miles. Right now, there's an agreement that the 6 nautical miles off Turkey is Turkish land, and everything outside those 6 miles is then Greece. Well, they're going to double that and create a new legislation.
Just quickly, I'm looking at it now. Which part are you talking about again?
So Lavos, Rhodes, these islands that are just south and off the coast of Turkey, they're technically Greek islands. And the agreement right now is that the 6 nautical miles off the coast of Turkey is Turkey. But Turkey will then pass legislation to expand that to 12 nautical miles, which would then include Greek territory, and they will claim that as their own. And and that is something that Paisios and other saints had talked about in the 80s and 90s. So well before, Saint Paisios reposed in 94. So all these prophecies that he's describing a world that did not exist at the time that he described it, but seems eerily similar to the world that we're living in right now.
Yeah, and Cyprus been hit as well already in this. So it looks like that's being dragged in.
And it's eventually we believe that the Turks, the Greeks, the Cypriots will receive the northern section that Turkey took from them. So if you look at a map of Cyprus, the northern eastern half is all Turkey. And eventually we believe that during this conflict, because Turkey's the nation that's going to get the brunt of the Third World War. They're the one that is not going to exist into the future. And they will no longer be controlling Cyprus. So the Cypriots will get their entire island back.
Yeah. I didn't actually ask you at the start, DPH, but do you have any time constraints? Because we've already been going for like 2 hours. So
no, man, it's all good.
We've gone through a lot of stuff here today, man. We've really covered a lot of ground, which is cool. Is there anything else, because we've basically gone full circle here, and then the whole entire eschatological view and the whole entire Orthodox view, and then the sort of continuation of the last thing that we talked about as well. So, I mean, anything else you want to talk about here, and then we'll read out all of the remaining super chats?
Nothing explicitly is coming to mind. One thing I would say is that I would expect censorship in the West to increase. So I got a video taken down 2 days ago from YouTube, which was me just covering the war. It was I called it like an emergency update alert. And I just talked about how I said Israel, like it was titled like Israel lies, Trump loses control. They didn't tell me why it got taken down, but I was told it was for misinformation. I have no idea what misinformation I presented because I was using X and various analysts that are talking about the war and just going through and demonstrating my thesis and providing evidence for what I think is occurring. YouTube took it down. I appealed it, and then they, through manual review, confirmed that it was not suitable. I have no idea what I said or what piece of content was in it or what they are claiming is misinformation. But we already see that Netanyahu in Israel has already prohibited all media from taking videos or sending out videos of any damage or any retaliation that Israel has. So Israel claims they don't want them to see where the interceptor missiles, the Iron Dome, where those are situated. So they asked the media not to show missiles launched from Israel to stop missiles coming in from Iran. But they also don't want the West or the mainstream media to show the catastrophe that's occurring. I mean, Iran was shooting cluster bombs last night, which is impossible for the Iron Dome to stop, which is basically a warhead that launches, and once it's over its target, it spreads out and turns into like 20 different warheads. So they destroyed like what was it, Beth Shema, which was like just west of Jerusalem. I mean, it looked like a nuclear winter. The whole city it looked like Gaza, basically. I mean, what happened, what the Israelis did to the Palestinians looked like what various cities are right now in Israel. And so I would suspect that censorship regarding this topic, we've already seen in the United States these anti-Semitism laws. Now, I am not here to promote hatred towards any group, and I don't need to say that, but anti-Semitism as a term is being used in a label to just delegitimize anybody that has legitimate criticism. But we know that Trump is an arch-Zionist. Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of War, the Secretary of Defense of the United States, is a Christian Zionist. In 2018, there's a video of him stating explicitly that his goal is to establish a global religious war so that the third temple can be built. For him, he thinks it's a prerequisite to cause Christ to come back again and be raptured up so he doesn't have to go through the tribulation and all this stuff. But essentially, these Christian Zionists worship Jews as the chosen people. And in many ways, it is like their sacrament. Protecting the Jewish people is like a sacramental promise and devotion for Christian Zionists. Well, the U.S. government is led by these people. Like I just told you about all these generals and commanders claiming this is a holy war and that Jesus told Trump that he's responsible for igniting Armageddon. Well, the Secretary of War, the Secretary of Defense, now called the Secretary of War, has literally said that he wants to build the third temple. So I would suspect that here in the United States, the social media platforms, we felt the Overton window expand in the last 2 years, that you could say things that you couldn't say before. X was part of that and was a catalyst for that free speech. But I suspect this was really giving us rope to hang ourselves, which I'm going to be strung up from it as well. And they're going to then go back and start reprimanding people for what they would call anti-Semitism and misinformation regarding this war or any action of the Israelis. So for content creators, I think this is a real possibility because, much of these tech companies are in the United States. And the United States is legitimately run right now by Christian Zionists that have a religious fanaticism for this conflict and believe that it is literally fulfilling the prophecies of the Old Testament and bringing Christ back. That is really dangerous. And that's why I think the theological perspective is so useful. Seeing the eschatology of the Jews, seeing the eschatology of the Shia Islamists, seeing the eschatology of the Christian Zionists that are the tax base and the voting base for the Israelis. And then looking at this from an Orthodox perspective, which has an eschatology very different from all of those, it's amazing how it truly is a holy war. It truly is a religious global war. So I'm mocking, Hegseth's objective and goals, but at the same time, I'm validating that in a sense, they did create what exactly it is that they wanted. Because by killing the Ayatollah, Israel and the United States basically said it's war against Shia Islam, which is like war against terrorism. that's a war that never stops because there's always more terrorists. There's always going to be more Shia Muslims. So it's the same thing playing itself. It's the same pattern.
All right, man. Well, I appreciate all of that, and it's been a super interesting conversation, bro. Let's get into some of these super chats, shall we? Red Fox over on Stream Elements sent 20 and said, just to be fair. Thank you very much, Red Fox. Abby Zhong sent 3 over on my side. 3 tenors saying helping Lord Jakers do the goal. Appreciate that. She also said, what's on the mug? This is a Rattlesnake TV mug, guys. One of the best, probably the best mug here on this side of planet Earth.
Yeah. Nothing holds liquids like that mug.
No, bro. Seriously. Seriously. Proctologist said, thanks for all the great content, Lord Jake. Thank you very much. 1 church membership gifted from B. Sorach. Whitzier said, Alberta separatist.
Oh, good for them. I hope Alberta goes through with it because that would be entirely detrimental to Canada. Alberta is one of the energy hubs. And if which they're trying to do, and according to the lawyer that's leading the separatist movement, they've already met with the Trump administration and essentially give them the go that the United States, when Alberta decides to secede from Canada, the Trump administration will recognize them as their own sovereign country. So it sounds like things are moving forward there. Is it going to happen? I don't know. But according to the lawyer, I was watching an interview. He thinks that they have the momentum to make it happen.
All right. It's a sin to drop a nuke. I've been debating my friends on this. Is it a sin to drop a nuke? God bless.
I guess it would depend on the reason for. So Orthodoxy is not a pacifist faith, right? The Orthodox, we have so many warrior saints that literally mostly led battles against the Muslims, sometimes against the Catholics in the Crusades, but mostly against Islam. So Orthodoxy is not a pacifist religion. Using military for the advancement of the sovereignty of Orthodox Christians is seen as a good thing. So in regards to utilizing a nuclear weapon, obviously that's a different category. It would depend on the reasoning. If it is through self-defense, I don't see how it would necessarily be a sin. If the point is, if it's an aggressive use of a nuclear weapon, yeah, absolutely, I could see that being sinful. And yeah, so
yeah. Guys, last chance if you want to ask DPH a question. You can send either me or Church of the Eternal Logos to Super Chat, and I'm going to see both of them. So last chance to get your questions in, guys. Abby says, great interview, good interview. I'll say great interview with DPH. It always is, you know. Recently, I've just been getting friends on the channel because I feel like I'm enjoying the smaller circle, but I might get some other people on the channel. But I've just been having you, Jim Bob, Rachel, Rob, and it's just been insulated.
Those are pretty base people. Those are all my friends too, and I love all those. You know, I was able to see Rob down at Andrews and Rachel's. He's a great dude too.
Yeah, Rob's a legend. He's it's funny because he's the exact same in person.
He's
the exact same. He's like jolly in person and everything as well. So just great value, you know. One of those people who's never an energy vampire.
Right. Well, I appreciate you having me on, man. I appreciate the opportunity to come here and talk about this stuff.
It's all good, man. Your streams have been absolutely killing lately. So it's good. I love to see the growth of your channel because I told you before when I first had you on, I had a few of my friends who were really into these sorts of things, doing deep dives. They were like to me, you got to check out Church of the Eternal Logos. And I was like, I've seen him debating on these various platforms with I think you've done debates with Andrew, debates with Jim Bob and these guys before, and then here we are. So I love it. Red Fox said, Tennant said, bless you guys for covering this. Christians will be prosecuted as the inversion gets worse.
Yep.
I mean, it's already been happening over the past few decades, hasn't it?
Yeah, it's already the most persecuted religion on the planet. And you look at these wars. So the war in Iraq, I mean, was one of the biggest displacement of Christians in history. And I mean, how many hundreds of thousands were killed or displaced, ancient communities gone. And so this thing's only going to do the exact same thing. So it's ironic that whether it be Kosovo and Serbia, whether it be Ukraine and Russia, that so many of the American wars, the people who get the biggest brunt of that are Christians around the world. which would make you think that it's almost led by an Antichrist spirit. So yeah, the Christian community, of course, in Africa, Nigeria has like the highest rate of Christian persecution in the world, something like that. But it's not going to get any better, which isn't a great sales point for converting people to the faith. But if you want the truth, it's the truth. And, you can look at some of my predictions regarding these events, which they're not my own. I'm pulling them from tradition. And if tradition is so accurate regarding the unfolding of history, maybe there's something to it.
Yeah. All right. Red Fox as well says DPH Return to Babylon was a great read. He says Babylon. Because it was a long book.
It is a long book. It's like 400. It's almost 500 pages. But for those of you who don't know where, I do have a book called Return to Babylon from Adam to Antichrist, which is the ultimate, most comprehensive Christian critique of transhumanism that begins with identifying the presuppositions of transhumanism in the medieval period in Western Europe. And I trace that all the way to contemporary transhumanism, their goals, and then compare and contrast that with Orthodox theosis as these two theologies that are going to lead the West moving forward on deification. Do you choose the Orthodox concept of deification, or do you choose the transhuman transcendence of biology itself? So if you're interested in transhumanism, check out my book, Return to Babylon.
Yeah, and your stores are all linked below. For those of you on my side watching, DPH's stores are linked below, just in the bio there. If you guys want to go check out his work, definitely recommend. Dano says for 10, who's got a better bookshelf though? I don't know.
I like your setup.
Yeah,
I see a Penguin Classic over there on the very bottom.
I got some penguins.
There's a Penguin Classic.
We got the Communist Manifesto. We've got Aristotle, Nicomachean Ethics, Plato's Republic. We've got Dante's Inferno.
Classic.
A lot of penguins in there, bro. A lot of penguins. So, Pufferfish Base says, my prediction is that turkey will be cooked this year's Thanksgiving.
It could be. Again, we don't make predictions about time. Usually we make more predictions about potential events that will be cascading towards something else. But who knows if this war's wrapped up soon? I mean, according to Israel, they're moving straight on to Turkey next. And according to Trump, we're moving straight on to Nicaragua and Cuba next. So
I don't know if you got the joke there, bro.
Yeah, the being cooked for Thanksgiving, the turkey for Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
Well, but Thanksgiving's November. Thanksgiving's November, and I was talking about, according to the Trump administration, the war may last till September. So that would actually make potential timeline sense that by November, after September, forces would be then focused on Turkey.
Right. People saying DPH books maxed me.
No.
What the hell?
I better.
What are your favorites?
My God, I spent 10 years trying to get going through graduate school to get a PhD. I better have some damn books.
Yeah, I can't even read. So they're all just decorations. I've literally haven't read a single book on that shelf. So Red Fox says, do you have recipes for maintaining gains on Lent? DPH, that's for you, bro.
So you got to drink protein at least twice a day. So you got to get your protein up. You have to deal with shrimp. So I just had rice and shrimp before hopping on here with you. So I would say just get as much protein as possible. So like when my wife and I go to the store, we get protein pasta. Anything that has protein that fits the vegan fast diet, anything that has added protein to it, we buy it, so that together at least you're getting somewhere close. I mean, you, depending on how big you are, you want at least 100 grams of protein. Obviously it's hard to get as much when you're not in the fast. So my recommendation is just get as much damn protein in your body as you can. And obviously the extra carbs help for getting a pump. So my method during the fast is a lot of hypertrophy. So not doing so much strength gaining, because I'm on a vegan diet and I don't normally eat vegan, only during the fast. Right. So I'm doing a bunch of hypertrophy, higher reps, big pumps. You have tons of carbs because you can't eat a bunch of meat. So it's beneficial. That's kind of been my method.
Yeah, I got signed up for a High Rocks. You ever heard of High Rocks?
Mm-mm.
It's like endurance, sort of. It's like muscular endurance sort of stuff. So you're doing a bunch of cardio, a lot of the erg machines and everything, and then you're doing a lot of squats, burpees, like wall balls. It's kind of like hit training, but
Mm-hmm.
not quite CrossFit. You're not doing Olympic lifting and that sort of thing. And so it's about an hour to an hour and a half. So I've been doing a lot more of that, but I got a bad back. So I enjoy my hypertrophy training. It's kind of like therapeutic. You can just sit in the gym and just pump weights and listen to music. But
I
now I'm doing a bunch of this hit training, so it's all right.
Man, hey, God bless you. I always tell people I'm like a dog. Unless there's a ball, it's really difficult for me to run and do high intense cardio. I hate high intense cardio. You know, you throw a basketball or a footballer out, and all of a sudden, you know, I'm willing to run and play a game, but doing cardio, that's one of my goals for this year, 2026, is getting the cardio. I'm good with the weight training, pretty good with the diet. I hate doing cardio, and that's one of my
Yeah.
biggest weaknesses. So I need to take some
I'm
inspiration
similar.
from you.
I like the ball as well, bro. I play five-a-side soccer.
Oh
Like
yeah.
once, maybe twice a week. I love that shit, dude. And it's
Oh
just
yeah.
such good exercise. Just repeat sprints, but also the hit training's good because you're doing a lot of ergs, like the rower and the ski erg and everything. That makes you fit, dude. And
I
the
gotta get on
five-a-side
that.
football as well. The repeat sprints, you know, gets your cardio up big time. So
Yeah,
there you go,
I gotta
Red
do
Fox. Join your local five-a-side team.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually joined one that me and my brother Vinny, who's a producer here as well, we joined one, but just the two of us, we got put into a team and they were shit. Bottom of the ladder. We were the best players, obviously. And then that was last season. And then this season, we've started our own team. And now we've gone up a division and we're dominating the A division. So that's
hell
just,
yeah.
I don't know. No one asked, but I was just,
Oh, dude,
get
I
excited about
love
this sort of
physical
stuff, bro.
competition. It's the
Yeah.
best.
I'm so competitive, it's actually ridiculous. Sometimes some people think it's a bad, like a downfall. Like when I was in Texas, me and Chase Haggard were playing FIFA, and I was getting really angry at him. I'd be like, Chase, fuck you. And he was
Oh,
like,
no.
he's like, you're such a bad loser. And I was like, that's my edge. You know? It's like that.
Well, that's funny you mentioned that, because when I was in Texas, Chase said, "Hey, do you play FIFA?" And I said, "Yeah, I like FIFA. It's been years since I played." He said, "Oh, well, I got to beat you like I beat Jake."
See, he can't let it go. He's like an annoying little brother, you know, and he just keeps like poking the spot that, you know, he knows pisses me off.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah, that's Chase.
Yeah. All right. Well, are we not men? Member over on the church for 5 months says, great stream. God bless. Thank you very much. And then 5 comes in from Bill Hicks saying, good opportunity for actual fasting to get into autophagy.
Mm-hmm.
I did that for 3 days of. I did that for the first 3 days of clean week. Wasn't as hard as you would think, actually.
Yeah. No, I'm using the fast to get my beach body ready. So, you know, got to get rid of a little bit of a holiday weight. You know, you start putting up around, you know, your summertime is our winter time. So you're probably coming out of your beach bod.
Well, we have like sunshine and nice weather all year round where I live.
Must be nice.
Yeah, it is. It's pretty good.
Yeah. So we're just now getting out of the winter freeze, and I'm going to use the fast to lose weight, continue my workouts, and hopefully by the end, I'm Antiochian. So after the fast, we have 40 days of non-fasting. So I'm just going to consume meat every single day. I cannot wait.
So tell me, what is just before we wrap up, what does exactly the fast look like for you, the 40 days of fasting? Do you just take it week by week?
In regards to like preparation?
Yeah, so like is the first week, is it like not eating
okay,
meat?
Yeah. So we have what's called Meat Fair Sunday. So this was 3 weeks ago, 3 or 4 weeks ago. I forget the exact date. So we'll have a Sunday in which we feast on meat. And then after that, that's the week leading up to Cheese Fair, which is like Forgiveness Sunday, where everybody in the church forgives each other. So you have 1 week where you do no meat. Then the next week you do no dairy and cheese. And after Forgiveness Sunday, Cheese Fair Friday, you're full blown into Lent. And so you basically have 48 days of Lenten fast, which is the strict fast of the Orthodox Church. But we just avoid certain foods. So we're not Muslims where you don't eat dirt while the sun's up or something like that. It's not Ramadan. somebody claimed that, like, well, how do you work out if you don't eat during the day? It's like, dude, I eat during the day. What are you talking about? I'm not a Muslim. We just don't eat certain foods. And the point is not that those foods are bad. It's to build spiritual discipline. So the point of after the resurrection, after Easter, what we call Pascha, then you feast. And because all these things are great, but while you journey with Christ towards the resurrection, you have to suffer with him. One of those is to build the spiritual discipline to prevent certain things to go in your mouth. And then you up your prayer life, scripture reading, church attendance, and almsgiving during this period. And then everybody gets, once Pascha comes. Have you ever gone to a Pascha service?
No.
Oh, dude, especially the Russians. So you go at, like, depending on your church, like 10 or midnight on Saturday, and you do the liturgy for like 3 hours. It's like 1, 2, 3 in the morning, depending on your church. And then it's liquor, it's meat, it's everything you weren't allowed to have. So it's usually the night of Pascha is when you get a drink with your priest.
Nice.
That's when the boys get together and throw back the shots.
Let's go.
All in the name of Christ is risen, of course.
Yeah. All right. Bill Hicks said, Jay, can you read my super chat asking for prayers for Alexei? He needs all of our support right now. I don't see a super chat about Alexei, but Alexei, prayers for Alexei, I guess. Do you know what's going on there, DPH, or no?
I'm just checking to see if he sent it to me or something. No, I'm not exactly sure who he is referring to.
Father Alexei.
Yeah, Father Alexei. A couple of them come to mind. There may be something going on I'm not fully aware of or not remembering right now.
Yeah. All right. Are you going to stick around and stream some more, DPH, or are you going to call it?
No, I'm out of here. The wife she's got plans for tonight, so we need to eat dinner and spend time with her.
Awesome, dude. Well, you have a great night, man. Always a pleasure. Thank you, everybody, for coming and joining the stream, and we'll do it again sometime soon.
Yeah, man. I appreciate you having me on, and I appreciate your friendship, man. It was great to actually meet you in person, and Andrew and Rachel and all of our same acquaintances have like great things to say about you, man. So I appreciate the friendship, being able to hang out and do streams and just spend time. So appreciate you.
Yeah, same goes, man. Same goes 100%. I'm going to be back in United States in May for a good few weeks. So,
oh, hell yeah.
Hopefully I'll be able to catch you guys.
Yeah, sounds good.
Yeah.
All right, brother. Well, God bless you and your brother.
Yeah. Peace, man. Take care. See you later, guys.